She looked at you and saw Momoa.
The story opens a decade in the past, in Rio de Janeiro, where powerful crime lord Hernan Reyes and his unpredictable son, Dante Reyes, are preparing for Dom and his crew to make their move. Dom's team is in Brazil planning a high-risk robbery, and when Dom finally arrives, he pulls off the impossible by stealing Reyes's massive treasury vault. The job quickly turns into chaos as Dante tears through the city in pursuit of them. The chase leads all the way to a bridge, where Dom stays back long enough to make sure Reyes is taken down, while Dante loses control and plunges off the bridge into the water below. Years later, in present-day Los Angeles, Dom is living a much quieter life. He is teaching little Brian how to drive, guiding him with patience and trying to pass on the same lessons that shaped him. Afterward, they return home, where the family has gathered for a barbecue. Abuelita Toretto is there too, surrounded by Letty, Mia, Tej, Roman, Ramsey, and Han. It feels like one of those rare, peaceful moments where everyone can breathe for a second. Abuelita shares a heartfelt message with the family, and then they all settle down to eat together. During the meal, the conversation shifts to a job that is supposed to be happening in Rome. According to what they know, little nobody has arranged the whole thing. Later that night, Dom and Letty talk privately about little Brian. Dom admits that his son tries to act strong, but deep down he is afraid of losing the people he loves. Their quiet moment is suddenly interrupted when Cypher appears at their home, badly wounded and barely holding herself together. Dom and Letty immediately move to protect little Brian before confronting Cypher, who has been one of their most dangerous enemies. But Cypher makes it clear that she is not there to fight. She warns them that something far worse is coming, and his name is Dante. She explains that Dante broke into her operation, captured the loved ones of her own men, and used them as leverage to turn her people against her. His real target is Dom. After stealing Cypher's hacking technology, Dante left her trapped with her own henchmen, who were ordered to finish her off. Cypher fought her way through them and managed to escape by throwing herself down an elevator shaft with one of the attackers. Before Cypher reached the Toretto house, Dom and Letty contacted little nobody. He immediately calls in agency agents, who arrive at the home and take Cypher into custody. Soon after, they realize the Rome mission was never arranged by little nobody at all. It was Dante's trap from the beginning. With no time to waste, Dom, Letty, and little nobody head straight to Rome. Meanwhile, Tej, Roman, Ramsey, and Han are already on the streets, transporting what they believe is cargo. But the shipment turns out to be a massive bomb. Dante hacks into their trucks and sends them swerving wildly through traffic, using the chaos to move the bomb toward the Vatican. Dom, Letty, and little nobody manage to intercept the rest of the team and guide them underground, but Dante is already several steps ahead. He tries to destroy them all, and the bomb breaks loose, rolling through the hills and streets of Rome like a wrecking ball. Letty goes after Dante, chasing him through the city, but he slips away and she is eventually arrested. Dom pushes forward and catches up to the bomb. Using a crane, he manages to knock it away from the Vatican before it can hit its target directly. Still, when the bomb finally detonates, the blast causes heavy destruction. In the aftermath, Dom's crew is blamed for the attack and branded as terrorists. They are forced to disappear, while Dante proudly taunts Dom, telling him he has begun tearing his family apart. At agency headquarters, the new director, Ames, meets with Tess, who is revealed to be Mr. Nobody's daughter. Ames has studied Dom's team for years, following their rise from illegal street racers to international operators involved in some of the biggest heists in the world. In his view, Mr. Nobody gave them far too much freedom. Tess pushes back, reminding him that Dom's crew has helped eliminate some truly dangerous threats. But Ames is not convinced. He persuades the agency board to move against them, and soon the media is calling Dom's family international terrorists. With the team now hunted, Roman takes Tej, Ramsey, and Han to London. Back in Los Angeles, Mia is watching over little Brian when a group of agency mercenaries suddenly storms the house. Mia fights to protect him while little Brian hides, but just when things look bad, Jakob arrives. Dom had already called him for help. Jakob crashes into the fight, throws one attacker straight through the floor, and takes down the others. He tells Mia to get herself, Brian, and the children somewhere safe. Then he takes little Brian with him, planning to bring him back to Dom. Tess later tracks Dom down in Brazil and explains the truth about Dante's identity. Dom finally understands why Dante is coming after him, and why this revenge is so personal. Dom also asks Tess to help clear the team's name and rescue Letty, who is being held inside a secret agency facility. Tess then goes to see Letty, and together they create a plan. They decide to stage a violent confrontation between themselves, making it appear as though Letty attacked Tess. The goal is to force the agency to transfer Letty out of the current facility and move her somewhere else, giving them a better chance to escape. While that plan begins to take shape, Dom goes to a street racing event to meet Diogo. There, he also runs into Isabel, a young woman he already knows. The night takes a dangerous turn when Dante appears and challenges Dom, Diogo, and Isabel to a race. What starts as a street race quickly becomes another twisted game. Dante reveals that bombs have been planted under Diogo's car and Isabel's car, forcing Dom into an impossible choice. He has to decide who gets to live and who dies. Dom chooses to save Isabel by slowing her car down, which causes Dante to trigger the bomb under Diogo's vehicle instead. Isabel crashes because of Dom's move, but Dom reaches her in time and removes the explosive from her car before it can go off. While Dom pulls Isabel from the wreckage and makes sure she survives, Dante uses the distraction to escape once again. Elsewhere, Roman, Tej, Ramsey, and Han meet with Bowie, an old hacking contact from Ramsey's past. Ramsey manages to recover an important file, and the discovery makes everything worse. She realizes that God's Eye, the powerful surveillance system once meant to track almost anyone on the planet, is now being twisted by Dante. Instead of using it for a mission, he is using it to hunt the people connected to Dom. On top of that, Dante drains their accounts and takes their money, but Roman reveals that he still has a private stash hidden away. With limited options left, the group decides they need to find Deckard Shaw. Their search leads them to London, where the meeting immediately turns violent. Shaw mistakes Han's arrival as a personal attack, since their history is anything but peaceful. The tension between them explodes into a fight, with both men ready to settle old business. But before things can go any further, a group of agency thugs storms in and interrupts them. Shaw quickly shifts his focus and tears through the attackers. Once the fight is over, Ramsey warns him that his mother, Magdalene, is listed as one of Dante's possible targets. That changes everything for Shaw. He leaves at once to protect his own family, while Roman, Tej, Ramsey, and Han look for a way to move safely before the agency or Dante can reach them again. Meanwhile, Letty wakes up inside an agency facility and finds herself locked in with Cypher. The two women do not trust each other at all, but Cypher has no intention of staying trapped. Using her hacking skills, she triggers a system release that fills the area with gas, knocking out the guards and creating a chance for them to escape. During the breakout, Letty and Cypher turn on each other. Their escape route becomes a brutal fight as they trade punches, kicks, and strikes with anything nearby. After the fight finally cools down, Letty tries to abandon Cypher and leave alone. But when she looks outside, she realizes the truth. The facility is not just hidden somewhere remote. It is buried in the freezing wasteland of Antarctica. Elsewhere, Jacob continues traveling with little Brian, trying to keep the boy calm while also keeping them both unnoticed. He plays the role of a friendly companion and protector, making their journey look as normal as possible. They board a plane, but the danger follows them there too. A flight attendant who knows Jacob quietly warns him that 3 of Dante's men are on board. Jacob handles the threat quickly, taking them down before they can make a move. He asks the flight attendant to hide their bodies, and then he and little Brian slip into a concealed jet that is set to take them toward Brazil. Back in Brazil, Isabel wakes up inside Dom's apartment, the same place Dom once shared with Elena. It is then revealed that Elena was Isabel's older sister. Isabel opens up to Dom, admitting that she always felt like she lived in Elena's shadow. In her grief, she even wonders if the wrong sister survived. Dom gently tells her that she should never think that way. With Isabel helping him, they search through Elena's old files on Dante and discover a property connected to him. The trail leads them to an abandoned police station. Dom goes there and finds something deeply unsettling. The station is filled with videos, recordings, and old material connected to him and his family. Dante has been watching them for a long time. Then Dante calls Dom and begins taunting him, explaining that he does not simply want to kill him. He wants Dom to suffer first, because that is the lesson his father passed down to him. Dom looks through the window and sees Isabel outside, just as Ames arrives with agency forces to arrest him. Dom is transported across the same bridge where the vault heist happened years earlier. But the convoy does not make it far before Dante's explosives rip through it. Chaos breaks out on the bridge as Tess and Ames try to confront Dante and his people. Unfortunately, Dante is prepared for that too. He has a sniper in position, and the shooter takes down both Tess and Ames, leaving them wounded and unable to stop him. The sniper then aims at Isabel, who has been captured by Dante. Dom reacts instantly and manages to move Isabel out of danger. During the confusion, Dante takes God's eye from Tess. He makes it clear to Dom that with this technology, he can now find Dom's son. Then he escapes again, leaving Dom with an even greater fear than before. Isabel helps get Tess to safety, while Dom races to reach little Brian. Ames, despite everything that has happened, helps Dom track them. Dante soon locates Jacob and little Brian, but Jacob is ready for a fight. He is driving a vehicle equipped with a powerful cannon, and he uses it to destroy Dante's henchmen one after another. Little Brian tries to help by climbing out of the back of the vehicle, but his brave move accidentally gives Dante the opening he needs. Dante gets close enough to grab him. Jacob quickly warns Dom, but Dom still has to reach them before it is too late. Dom's car is released from a jet, dropping straight into the chaos below. As he speeds across the bridge, two of Dante's sniper helicopters launch harpoons into his car. Dom turns the attack against them by steering off the bridge at the perfect moment, forcing the helicopters to slam into each other and explode. Then Jacob makes the ultimate choice. To give Dom a clear path, he flips his own vehicle, which is loaded with explosives, directly into the incoming enemies. The blast destroys them, but Jacob sacrifices himself in the process, going out in a heroic and heartbreaking moment. Dom finally reaches Dante's car and manages to pull little Brian into his own vehicle. But Dante still has one more trap waiting. He sends two oil tankers rolling toward Dom and his son, planning to crush them and send everything over a dam. At the same time, the plane carrying Roman, Tej, Ramsey, and Han is hit by a missile. The most shocking part is that the missile strike is ordered by Ames, who reveals himself as Dante's hidden ally. He has actually been working with Dante ever since the Rio heist. Dom can only watch in horror as his friend's plane crashes into the side of a mountain. Dante tells Dom that he has suffered enough and that now his life is finally going to end. He activates explosives planted along the dam, giving Dom only moments before everything goes up. Trapped with little Brian beside him, Dom looks at his son and realizes there is only one way out. He drives the car down the face of the dam. As the oil tankers collide above them and explode, Dom hits the nitrous and pushes the car ahead of the firestorm chasing them. For a brief moment, it looks like he and little Brian may have escaped the worst of Dante's plan. Far away in Antarctica, Letty and Cypher make it out of the facility and step into the frozen open air. Suddenly, a massive submarine rises from beneath the ice. Letty is stunned when she sees who is controlling it, Giselle. Cypher, however, does not appear surprised. Her reaction suggests that she may have known this rescue was coming all along. During the credits, a group of police officers enters an abandoned facility connected to Dante. One officer hears a phone ringing and picks it up. On the other end, Dante's voice reveals that this man is now his next target. The officer is revealed to be Luke Hobbs, the man who personally executed Dante's father on that unforgettable day in Rio. Instead of showing fear, Hobbs answers with calm confidence, telling Dante that he is not hard to find. Then, he crushes the phone in his hand, setting up the next battle. With that final warning, the movie comes to an end. So here we are again, Fast X Munch. The 10th main entry in a franchise that somehow started with street racing, DVD players, undercover cops, and people talking very seriously about quarter miles, and has now become this massive globe-smashing action soap opera where cars can basically do whatever the script needs them to do. And honestly, at this point, that's kind of the deal. Nobody is walking into X-Fast X expecting quiet realism. Nobody is sitting there thinking, I hope this one really respects traffic laws. We all know what this series is now. It is loud, expensive, ridiculous, emotional in the most blunt force way possible, and completely obsessed with the word family. But this one comes with a slightly different weight behind it. Not because the movie suddenly becomes mature or grounded, absolutely not, but because it's being sold as the beginning of the end, the road to the finale. The big closing stretch for Dom Toretto and the crew that has somehow survived explosions, betrayals, government agencies, secret siblings, fake deaths, real deaths, space travel, and probably 3 or 4 laws of nature being permanently deleted. That's the funny thing about Fast X. It wants to feel like a major final chapter event, but it also behaves exactly like another Fast movie. Bigger cast, bigger locations, bigger stunts, bigger emotional speeches. It's not really slowing down to reflect on the journey. It's flooring the gas pedal while yelling that the finish line is coming. And depending on how much patience you still have for this franchise, that can either feel exciting or exhausting. Because, let's be honest, after this many movies, you're not just reviewing Fast XX as one film. You're reviewing the entire machine around it. The history, the habits, the nostalgia, the nonsense. The way every new entry somehow acts like it's the biggest one yet, even though the last 4 already said the same thing. Still, there is something weirdly impressive about a franchise reaching its 10th main chapter and still carrying this much noise around it. Even if you think the series should have ended years ago, it's hard to deny that Fast and Furious has built its own strange cinematic universe, one where death is optional, physics are decorative, and family dinners are treated like sacred ceremonies. So Fast XX arrives with that baggage. It's not just another sequel. It's the start of the goodbye tour. Or at least, that's what they're telling us. Because with this franchise, even the end of the road feels like it might have 3 more exits, 2 spin-offs, and a surprise mid-credit scene waiting around the corner. And by now, the franchise has trained us pretty well. You don't go into a modern Fast and Furious movie asking, is this believable? That question left the room a long time ago. Maybe around the time cars started flying between skyscrapers. Maybe when a submarine got involved. Maybe when they actually sent a car into space and everyone just sort of had to sit there and accept it. So with Fast XX, the real question is not whether the movie makes sense. It usually doesn't. The better question is, does the nonsense still have enough energy to be fun? Because this series has become its own very specific kind of entertainment. It has its own rules, or maybe more accurately, its own refusal to follow rules. Cars are not just vehicles anymore. They are weapons, parachutes, shields, emotional symbols, family members, and occasionally tools for solving international terrorism. Every villain has a secret connection to the past. Every dead character has a possible return ticket. Every mission somehow starts with cars and ends with half a city being destroyed. And still, the characters talk about it all with the seriousness of people handling ancient prophecy. That's part of the charm, I guess, or part of the problem. Depends on where you stand with these movies. For longtime fans, there is a comfort in the formula. You know Dom is going to speak in that low, gravelly voice about protecting the people he loves. You know Roman is going to panic. Tej is going to explain some tech thing that barely matters. Ramsey will probably hack something impossible in about 12 seconds. Someone from the past will walk back into the story like they were just waiting behind a curtain, and sooner or later everyone will gather around the idea of family as if it's both a life philosophy and a military strategy. The weird thing is, the franchise is aware of this now. Fast XX knows people joke about the family speeches. It knows people laugh at the broken physics. It knows the series has become absurd, and sometimes it even leans into that self-awareness. There are moments where the movie almost winks at the audience, like, yeah, we know, just go with it, but that self-awareness can only carry you so far. Because once a franchise becomes this big, this crowded, and this impossible to take seriously, it has to work twice as hard to make the chaos feel fresh. And that's where Chastex becomes interesting in a messy way. It gives you the usual ingredients: huge action, returning faces, emotional speeches, a global threat, and a villain with a personal grudge. Nothing about that is new, but the movie still behaves like it is the biggest turning point in the saga. So, you're sitting there watching all this destruction, all these characters splitting off into different subplots, all these callbacks to older films, and part of you is enjoying the ride. Another part of you is thinking, how much road can this thing possibly have left? Because at this stage, Fast and Furious is not just a movie franchise anymore. It is a machine, a loud, expensive, sentimental machine that runs on nostalgia, explosions, muscle cars, surprise cameos, and Vin Diesel saying, family, like it can stop gravity. And Fast X is very much part of that machine, for better and worse. The interesting thing is that Fast XX doesn't just pull a new villain out of nowhere and ask us to care, Well, okay, it kind of does. But it's smarter about it than you might expect, because the movie reaches all the way back to F Fast Fives, which is still one of the most important entries in this whole series. That was the one where the franchise really stopped being about street racing and fully transformed into a giant heist action machine. And at the center of that movie was the Rio Vault sequence, probably one of the most ridiculous and memorable set pieces this franchise has ever done. You remember it. Dom and Brian dragging a massive safe through the streets of Rio like it's just another Tuesday, cars flying everywhere, buildings getting smashed, police cars being tossed around like toys. A sequence that made absolutely no sense if you thought about it for more than 5 seconds, but somehow worked because it had momentum, confidence, and that old-school fast energy. Fast X looks back at that moment and basically says, what if all that destruction had a consequence? And honestly, that's not a bad idea, because in most of these movies, Dom and the crew destroy half a city and then move on to the next barbecue. The franchise rarely stops to ask who was left behind, who lost something, or who might come crawling out of the wreckage years later with a grudge. So bringing the story back to the Rio Vault heist gives Fast X at least some emotional fuel. It connects the new chaos to something the audience already remembers. The movie revisits that old scene, almost rewriting it from another angle, and suddenly, the giant safe chase is not just a fun action memory anymore. It becomes the origin point for Dante Reyes, the son of Hernan Reyes, a man who apparently watched Dom's crew tear apart his father's empire and has spent years turning that humiliation into revenge. Now, is this retcon completely smooth? Not really. You can feel the movie digging through its own history, looking for something it can turn into a new threat. It's a little convenient, a little soap opera, very much in line with what this franchise has become. But still, as far as late franchise villain setups go, it works better than it probably should, because it reminds us that Just Fast 5 had a kind of reckless magic to it. That film gave the series one of its biggest highs, and Fast X is trying to build a final chapter conflict from the damage left behind. It's not subtle. This franchise has never been subtle. But there is something satisfying about the movie saying, remember that insane thing you cheered for years ago? Someone else remembers it too, and they are not laughing. That's the hook. The past is catching up with Dom. And in true Fast and Furious fashion, the past is arriving with explosions, motorcycles, a giant bomb, and a villain who looks like he dressed himself after losing a bet at a luxury nightclub. And that brings us to Dante Reyes. On paper, his motivation is pretty simple. Dom and his crew destroyed his father's empire back in Rio. His father died, and Dante has been sitting on that pain long enough for it to turn into something much uglier. He doesn't just want revenge in the basic action movie sense. He doesn't only want Dom dead. That would be too easy, too quick, maybe even too clean for a villain like this. Dante wants Dom to suffer. And that detail matters, because this franchise has had plenty of villains who show up, threaten the family, drive something expensive, then eventually either disappear or become part of the family themselves. At this point, that is basically the Fast and Furious cycle of life. Enemy today, barbecue guest tomorrow. But Dante feels a little different because his anger is personal from the beginning. He is not just chasing a device or a weapon or some vague world-ending technology. He is chasing Dom's peace, his reputation, his people, his entire sense of control. That is what makes him dangerous, at least in theory. The movie frames him as someone who has been studying Dom for years, not just waiting around for a chance to strike, but building a plan around what Dom values most. And of course, what does Dom value most? Family. The movie has reminded us of this once or twice, maybe 300 times. So Dante's revenge is not just about killing Dom. It is about turning that sacred word against him, breaking the circle, scattering the crew, making everyone Dom loves feel like a weakness instead of a strength. That is a strong idea for a final saga villain. Now, does the actual plan always make sense? No, absolutely not. There are moments where Dante seems less like a criminal mastermind and more like someone who read the script early and decided to have fun with it. He is somehow ahead of everyone, everywhere, all the time. His traps are ridiculous. His timing is impossible. His logic is, let's say, flexible. But again, this is Fast and Furious. At some point, the villain being impossibly prepared is just part of the meal. What helps Dante is that his revenge has emotional flavor. He comes from one of the franchise's most iconic moments, so even when the writing gets messy, there is a recognizable wound underneath all the chaos. Dom ruined his family, at least from Dante's point of view. Now Dante wants to ruin Dom's. It is not deep, exactly. This is not a quiet character study about grief and inherited violence. Let's not pretend we're suddenly watching some prestige drama with muscle cars, but for this franchise, it gives the conflict enough shape. It gives Dante a reason to be theatrical, cruel, and weirdly playful. He is not just attacking Dom's team because the movie needs a villain. He is turning an old victory into a new nightmare. And in a series where consequences usually vanish faster than the laws of physics, that kind of revenge hook actually does stand out. Now, if there is one thing almost everyone seems to agree on with Fest XW, it's this: Jason Momoa walks away with the movie. Whether you love what he is doing or think he is doing way too much, you definitely notice him. And honestly, that alone gives the film a pulse it doesn't always have when he's off screen. Because Momoa plays Dante like he wandered into the wrong franchise on purpose and decided to redecorate the whole thing. Everyone else is still operating in the usual Fast and Furious emotional zone. Serious faces, heavy speeches, loyalty, honor, family, all of that. And then Dante shows up acting like he's having the time of his life inside a very expensive demolition derby. He is playful. He is strange. He is petty in a way that feels almost refreshing. He doesn't just want to beat Dom, he wants to enjoy the process. He wants the performance of revenge, the costumes, the hair, the weird little jokes, the dramatic poses, the sudden mood swings. It's all part of the show. And that's what makes him stand out. The franchise has had villains before, obviously. Some were cool, some were forgettable, some eventually became friends because that's apparently how this universe handles attempted murder. But Dante has a different flavor. He is not trying to outmuscle Dom. He is not trying to be more stoic than him. He is not standing around in a black coat growling about power. He is colorful. Annoying, maybe, but colorful. And in a movie this crowded, that matters. There are so many characters running around in Fast XX that a lot of them start to blur together. One group is here, another group is there. Someone is hacking something, someone is chasing someone from the past returns for a minute, then disappears again. It gets messy. But whenever Dante enters the scene, the movie suddenly feels sharper, not always better written, but more alive. Momoa seems to understand exactly what kind of film he's in. He doesn't play Dante like this is grounded crime drama. He plays him like the franchise has already gone past the point of restraint, so why not push even further? Why not make the villain as ridiculous as the action scenes? Why not match the tone of cars jumping off cliffs and bombs rolling through Rome? And that energy helps Fast X more than it probably deserves. Because without Dante, this could easily become just another late-stage franchise entry full of callbacks, cameos, and half-finished setup for the next movie. With him, at least there's someone on screen who feels unpredictable. Someone who can make even the dumbest moment feel like it has a little spark. Is it subtle? No, not even close. But subtlety left this franchise several explosions ago. Momoa gives the movie a villain big enough, weird enough, and loud enough to survive inside this circus. And for a series that has spent years trying to keep raising the stakes, that kind of wild energy is probably exactly what it needed. The easiest comparison for Dante is obvious. He is basically this franchise's Joker, not literally, of course. But the movie is definitely reaching for that kind of chaotic, theatrical villain energy. Dante doesn't move through the story like a normal bad guy with a clean plan and a cold expression. He performs every scene. He turns revenge into a show. He smiles when he should be terrifying, jokes when he should be quiet, and dresses like he knows exactly how much he is irritating everyone around him. And in a franchise built on muscle, seriousness, and macho posturing, that choice is actually kind of clever. Because Dom's whole presence is heavy. He barely needs to move his face. He just stands there, speaks in that low voice, and the movie treats every sentence like it belongs on a family crest. The rest of the crew, even when they're joking, still exist inside that world. They are cool. They are capable. They are loyal. They know the rules of this universe. Dante doesn't care about those rules. He feels like someone who wandered into Dom's church of family and decided to spray paint the walls. That's why the Joker comparison comes up so naturally. It's not just the flamboyance or the little bursts of madness. It's the way he seems to enjoy poking at the emotional seriousness of the series. He looks at Dom's whole identity, the family, the loyalty, the honor, the sacred barbecue table, and treats it like something to twist, mock, and break. There's something fun about that. For years, these movies have become bigger and more absurd, but a lot of the characters still act like they're standing in a very serious drama. Dante brings in this unstable comic book villain energy that almost makes the rest of the movie feel more honest. If the action is already cartoonish, why not have a villain who behaves like he knows he's in a cartoon? He dances around the edges of scenes. He plays with people instead of simply threatening them. He turns intimidation into theater. Sometimes it works beautifully. Sometimes it feels like he's one step away from being in a completely different movie. But even when it goes too far, at least it gives S-Fast XF flavor. That matters because the franchise has done the tough villain before. The icy villain, the military villain, the hacker villain, the betrayed family villain. Dante is different because he is not trying to match Dom's seriousness. He is trying to make Dom's seriousness look ridiculous. And that might be the most effective weapon anyone has used against this franchise in years. Not a bigger car, not a bigger bomb. Not another secret government device. Just a villain who walks in, looks at all the sacred Fast and Furious traditions, and laughs in their face. But here's the thing with Dante, I can completely understand why he doesn't work for everyone. Because Jason Momoa is not giving a quiet villain performance here. He is not doing controlled menace. He is not standing in the shadows, whispering threats with surgical precision. He is loud, he is weird, he is exaggerated. He is basically throwing glitter on the franchise's usual revenge villain template and daring you to complain about it. For some people, that is exactly why he works. He gives F-Fast X-esque a badly needed jolt. Every time the movie starts sinking into another familiar conversation about loyalty, or another subplot that feels like it only exists because an actor was available for 3 days, Dante cuts through the noise. He's unpredictable. He's funny in a twisted way. He seems genuinely amused by the chaos he's creating, which makes him more entertaining than a villain who just stands there talking about power. And honestly, after 10 main films, this franchise needed someone who could make the room feel different. But there is another side to it. Sometimes Dante is so big, so campy, so deliberately strange, that the threat starts to wobble. You're not always scared of him. Sometimes you're just watching Momoa have fun. And depending on the scene, that can either be a strength or a problem. There are moments where he feels dangerous because he's playful, like he could do something awful and then laugh about the timing. That kind of villain can be unsettling. But there are also moments where the performance gets so cartoonish that it becomes harder to take the danger seriously. The silky outfits, the little poses, the jokes, the dramatic gestures, it's a lot. Maybe too much for some viewers. And that's where the divide happens. If you're already willing to accept Fast and Furious as a live-action cartoon, Dante probably fits right in. In fact, he might be the most honest character in the movie. He knows the world is absurd, so he behaves absurdly. But if you still want even a little bit of grounded menace from this franchise, he might drive you crazy. That's why the reaction to him is so split. One viewer can walk away saying, finally, a villain with personality. Another can walk away saying, why is Aquaman doing a Joker impression in a silk shirt? And weirdly, both reactions make sense. For me, even when Dante goes too far, I'd rather watch a villain who risks being too much than one who leaves no impression at all. S-Fast X has plenty of forgettable pieces. Dante is not one of them. Whether you love him or hate him, he gives the movie something to talk about. And at this point in the franchise, that alone is not a small thing. What makes Dante even more interesting is that, in a strange way, he feels like the villain Cypher was probably supposed to be. Now, Cypher has always had the ingredients of a major Fast and Furious threat. She is smart, ruthless, connected, and dangerous on a global level. On paper, that should make her terrifying. But the problem is, for a franchise this loud, this ridiculous, and this emotionally oversized, a cold mastermind sitting behind screens can only go so far. Dante, on the other hand, understands the assignment in a much messier way. He is not just dangerous because he has a plan. He is dangerous because he makes the plan feel personal, petty, cruel, weirdly entertaining. He doesn't just want to win from a distance. He wants to stand there and watch Dom react. He wants to enjoy the little emotional wounds along the way. He wants revenge to have style, and that gives him a stronger presence. With Cypher, the threat often felt technical, hacking, surveillance, systems control, very serious, very global. Someone is typing fast in a dark room. Dante is more emotional than that. His whole motivation comes from pain, humiliation, and family loss, which makes him a more direct mirror to Dom. Dom lives by family. Dante was created by the destruction of his own. That contrast is simple, but it works. And maybe that is why Dante feels like he gives the franchise a cleaner villain identity than Cypher ever did. He is sadistic but playful, strategic but chaotic. He can walk into a scene and instantly change the temperature. You don't need a long explanation of what he represents. He is revenge dressed up like a party that has gone horribly wrong. Of course, the writing still does him no favors sometimes. His plan gets ridiculous. His ability to be 10 steps ahead of everyone becomes almost magical. There are moments where the movie wants us to believe he has planned every tiny detail across multiple countries, and you just have to laugh because, sure, why not? At this point, planning in these movies apparently works the same way gravity does, only when convenient. But as a villain concept, Dante has what Cypher often lacked: personality that fills the screen. He makes the threat feel like it has a pulse. He turns the revenge plot into something theatrical and uncomfortable. And even when the movie around him becomes crowded or clumsy, Dante keeps reminding you that this conflict is not just about another mission. It is about someone who took Dom's greatest belief, family, and twisted it into a weapon. That's why he lands, not because he is the most logical villain, not because his master plan survives any serious questioning, but because in a franchise that has spent years chasing bigger explosions, Dante brings back something more useful, a villain who actually feels personal. Then there's Dom Toretto. And talking about Dom at this point is tricky, because he is less of a normal character now and more like the emotional monument this whole franchise keeps driving around. He is still Dom. Same voice, same stare, same sleeveless seriousness, same belief that family is not just important, but basically the answer to every possible crisis on Earth. A bomb rolling through Rome? Family. A villain from the past? Family. International manhunt? Family. Someone probably burns toast in this universe, and Dom looks into the distance like, you don't turn your back on family. And look, that has always been part of the appeal. Vin Diesel built Dom into this strange action movie father figure, part street racer, part superhero, part barbecue philosopher. He is the guy everyone trusts, the guy who carries the emotional weight, the guy who can look at a situation that makes absolutely no sense and still speak with total conviction. But in Fast X, that role is starting to feel very familiar, maybe too familiar. Dom is once again the protector, once again the target, once again the man who must keep his family safe while also constantly dragging them into situations where safety is clearly not on the menu. The movie gives him a personal reason to care, especially with his son involved, but the emotional pattern is something we've seen many times before. He worries, he growls, he drives, he talks about family, he survives the impossible. That's the Dom cycle now, and the problem is not that Dom has stayed consistent. Consistency can be powerful, especially in a franchise this long. The problem is that the movie around him has become so loud and strange that his usual seriousness sometimes feels frozen in place. While Dante is bouncing around the screen like chaos in designer clothing, Dom is still standing there like he's trying to win a staring contest with destiny. Sometimes that contrast works. Dante is all movement and mockery. Dom is all weight and conviction. You can see why the movie wants to place them against each other. One man treats family like a sacred code. The other turns that code into a weapon. But there are also moments where Dom feels less like an evolving character and more like a brand requirement. He has to say the lines. He has to protect the table. He has to be the immovable center of the franchise, even when the story desperately needs a little more surprise from him. And that's where Fast X runs into one of its bigger issues. Dante feels new even when he is ridiculous. Dom feels familiar even when the stakes are supposedly higher than ever. The movie keeps telling us this is the beginning of the end, but Dom himself doesn't really feel like a man approaching the end of a long road. He feels like Dom doing Dom things in another oversized sequel. Still, there is something oddly comforting about him. Even when the writing becomes silly, even when the action breaks reality in half, Dom gives the franchise its center. You may laugh at the speeches, you may roll your eyes at how seriously he says everything, but without that absolute belief, Without that stubborn, almost mythic devotion to family, these movies would probably collapse into pure noise. So yes, Dom is repetitive, but he is also the reason the repetition has a shape. Vin Diesel's performance in Fast X1 is exactly the kind of thing that depends on how much goodwill you still have for Dom Toretto. Because if you're already emotionally invested in this character, Diesel still gives you that familiar presence, the quiet intensity, the low voice, the protective energy. The sense that Dom is carrying the whole weight of the family on his shoulders, even when the movie around him is doing backflips off a dam. There's a reason this character became the face of the franchise. Diesel plays Dom with total sincerity, and that sincerity is important. In a series this absurd, somebody has to believe in it completely. Somebody has to stand in the middle of all the explosions and say the word family, like it can actually hold the universe together. And Diesel does that. He never winks at the audience. He never acts embarrassed by the material. He gives the same level of commitment to a quiet father-son moment as he does to a car stunt that should have turned his character into dust. That kind of commitment is part of why these movies have lasted as long as they have. But at the same time, you can feel the limits of it now. Dom has become so locked into his own myth that Diesel doesn't have much room to play. Most of the time, he is either staring seriously, speaking slowly, or reacting to danger with the emotional range of a man who already knows physics gave up on him 5 movies ago. There are moments where you almost want someone to shake the character loose a little. Give him a strange scene. Let him be surprised. Let him feel like a person again instead of a symbol. Because when Jason Momoa is on the other side of the movie, throwing every color and weird gesture he can find at the screen, Diesel's stillness becomes even more noticeable. Sometimes that contrast helps. Dom is the rock, Dante is the storm. That's clearly what the movie is going for. But sometimes the rock just feels very still. To be fair, Diesel does have a few softer moments, especially early on, where you can see the warmer side of Dom. Those scenes remind you that underneath all the growling and impossible driving, this character was always supposed to be about loyalty, protection, and old-fashioned heart. He is not meant to be funny in the same way Roman is funny, or flamboyant in the way Dante is flamboyant. Dom's whole thing is emotional seriousness. The problem is that after this many movies, emotional seriousness can start to look like emotional repetition. So Diesel is not bad in Fast X, not really. He is doing the thing he has always done, and for some fans, that thing still works. But the movie is so crowded, so loud, and so desperate to feel like a massive event that Dom's familiar energy sometimes gets swallowed by everything around him. He remains the center of the franchise. But in this movie, he is not always the most interesting thing in it. And of course, we have to talk about the family thing. Because at this point, saying Fast and Furious is about family feels almost too obvious. It's like saying the cars are fast or the explosions are loud. The franchise has repeated the idea so many times that it has basically become its own language. Dom doesn't just have friends. He has family. He doesn't just protect people. He protects family. He doesn't just make decisions. He makes them through the sacred emotional filter of family. And depending on your mood, that is either weirdly touching or completely exhausting. The funny thing is, the family theme didn't start as a joke. In the earlier films, it actually gave the series some identity. These weren't just action characters bouncing from one chase to another. They had a bond. They had loyalty. They had this little world built around garages, street races, backyard meals, and people who chose each other when the rest of the world didn't. That stuff mattered. It gave the franchise a heart, even when the plots got bigger and dumber. You could believe that these people cared about each other. You could believe Dom's crew was more than just a team hired for a mission. They were messy, loyal, stubborn people who had been through enough together to earn that word. But in Fast X chess, the word family is carrying a lot of mileage, maybe too much mileage. The movie keeps leaning on it like it can solve every emotional problem, explain every character decision, and make every ridiculous situation feel important. And sometimes, it still works. When the film slows down just enough to show Dom with his son, or to remind us that these people have survived impossible things together, there is still some warmth there. It is blunt, but it is sincere. That sincerity has always been part of the franchise's strange charm. The problem is that sincerity becomes harder to feel when the movie is also juggling a giant bomb in Rome. Secret agencies, returning villains, surprise cameos, fake deaths, global manhunts, and a villain who treats revenge like performance art. The emotional core starts competing with the circus around it. And after 10 main movies, the family speeches can feel less like character moments and more like franchise maintenance. Like the movie is checking in every few scenes to remind us, don't worry, this is still about family, even while the plot is flying in 12 different directions. Still, I don't want to pretend the theme has no value anymore. For fans, this is part of the comfort food. You come to these movies for the cars, sure, the action, the noise, the impossible stunts, but you also come for that ridiculous, oversized loyalty. You come for the idea that no matter how many countries get destroyed, no matter how many enemies come back from the past, no matter how little the story makes sense, this crew will still end up fighting for each other. That is both the best and worst thing about the family theme now. It gives the franchise its heart, and it also gives the franchise its biggest cliché. Fast X knows people laugh at it. The movie even plays with that criticism a little. But it still believes in the idea completely, and maybe that's why it hasn't fully collapsed into parody. Under all the madness, there is still one simple emotional engine running. Dom believes family is everything. The movie believes Dom. And whether you find that moving or ridiculous probably decides a lot about how much patience you have left for this series. The actual plot kicks into gear with the Rome sequence, where Dom's crew gets pulled into what looks like another one of their usual impossible missions. Roman, Tej, Han, and Ramsey are off doing their thing, and at first it has that familiar Rhythm-S Fast and Furious rhythm. There's a mission, there's a target, there's banter, there's tech talk, and you can already feel the movie settling into its usual comfort zone. But then the whole setup turns out to be a trap. Dante isn't just attacking them directly, he's setting them up. And suddenly, the crew is blamed for a massive terrorist-style incident in Rome, the kind of public disaster that turns them from international problem solvers into the world's most wanted overnight. It's a big swing for the story, because it forces the family to scatter. Dom can't just gather everyone around the table and plan the next move. The crew is separated, the authorities are after them, and Dante gets exactly what he wants: isolation, panic, and chaos. In theory, that's a strong setup. Because for once, the threat is not only physical, it's reputational. Dom's crew has survived tanks, planes, submarines, satellites, and whatever else this franchise has thrown at them, but now they're being turned into public enemies. Dante is attacking the image of the family as much as the people inside it. The Rome sequence is built to feel huge. A giant bomb rolling through the city, cars chasing it, cops chasing the cars, everyone screaming, everything moving too fast. It's exactly the kind of absurd disaster only this franchise could treat like a driving challenge. Most movies see a bomb in the middle of Rome and think evacuation. Fast and Furious sees it and thinks, what if Dom could steer it with a car? And look, visually, it gives the movie one of its major set pieces. It's loud, ridiculous, and impossible to ignore. But narratively, this is where the writing starts wobbling. Because the movie needs Dom and the crew to be blamed very quickly, so it just sort of forces that reality into place. The authorities turn against them almost instantly. The media narrative locks in. Everyone reacts like there's no room for doubt, even though the situation is obviously messy and full of questions. You're watching it thinking, wait, nobody is going to investigate this for more than 12 seconds? That's the issue. The idea of Dante framing the family is good. It gives the story momentum and raises the stakes. But the execution feels rushed, like the script knows where it needs everyone to end up and doesn't want to waste time building a believable path to get there. And normally, with this franchise, you can forgive a lot of nonsense. That's part of the agreement. But this sequence is not just another wild stunt. It's the inciting incident for the whole movie, maybe even for the whole finale arc. It needs to feel tighter than it does. Instead, it feels like the movie says, they're fugitives now, and expects us to move on because there's another chase coming. Still, the purpose is clear. Rome breaks the family apart. It puts Dom on the defensive. It gives Dante the upper hand. And it turns the movie into a global manhunt where the crew has to survive not only the villain, but the system now hunting them. It's messy, but it gets the engine started. And this is where Fast X asks for a little more patience than usual. Because the Rome setup is supposed to be the big turning point. It's the moment that throws the entire crew into crisis, gives Dante control of the board, and turns Dom's family into fugitives. On paper, that should feel sharp. It should feel like the villain has outsmarted them in a way that actually hurts. But the writing around it is rough, not because the idea is bad, framing Dom's crew for a disaster is a perfectly workable concept, especially in a franchise where they've spent years operating in that strange space between criminals, heroes, spies, and government assets. The world already doesn't quite know what to do with them, so Dante turning that confusion against them makes sense. The problem is how quickly and easily it happens. The movie basically has a giant bomb rolling through Rome, Dom trying to stop it, chaos everywhere, and somehow the immediate conclusion becomes, yes, obviously these are the villains. Shoot at them. Hunt them. Blame them. Case closed. And you're sitting there thinking, really? Nobody is asking why the people supposedly responsible for the bomb are also the ones trying to stop it? Nobody pauses long enough to question the timing? Nobody in this world has seen Dom's crew save civilization, like, several times already? I know this franchise treats logic like a seatbelt nobody wants to wear, but even by Fast and Furious standards, the convenience is pretty loud. It feels less like the authorities are reacting naturally and more like the script needs them to react that way so the movie can move into the next phase. That's the issue with the Rome incident. It's not just unrealistic. Unrealistic is expected here. It's underwritten. The sequence has all the ingredients for a great inciting event. A spectacular location, a ticking clock, a villain pulling strings, a family being framed, and a massive public disaster. But instead of building tension through smart manipulation, the movie rushes the aftermath. Dante's plan works because the plot says it works, and that weakens the threat a little. Because Dante is supposed to be this mastermind who has studied Dom for years, he is supposed to be terrifying because he knows exactly how to hurt them. But when the plan relies on everyone else in the world becoming instantly foolish, the cleverness starts to feel artificial. Still, I get what the movie is trying to do. It wants to put the family in a place where they have no protection, no official support, and no easy way back. It wants Dom isolated. It wants the crew scattered. It wants the public image of the family destroyed. And as a broad action movie setup, that works well enough. But for something that carries this much story weight, it needed cleaner writing. This is supposed to launch the final stretch of the saga. It's not just a random chase in the middle of the movie. It's the event that turns everything upside down. And when that event feels shaky, the whole story starts with a bit of a limp, even while the explosions are trying very hard to convince you otherwise. That's kind of the Fast experience in miniature. Big idea, huge spectacle, messy logic, and a script hoping the engine noise is loud enough that you don't ask too many questions. Then the agency gets pulled into the mess, because apparently in the later Fast and Furious movies, you can't just have cars, revenge, and explosions anymore. You also need shadow organizations, government operators, secret facilities, people with badges who may or may not understand what movie they're in, and at least one character explaining why Dom Toretto is either the most dangerous man alive or the only person who can save everyone. That's where Ames and Tess come in. Ames, played by Ritchson, steps into the story as the new head of the agency, and he does not have the same warm feelings toward Dom's crew that Mr. Nobody had, which, honestly, is understandable from a certain angle. If you looked at Dom's record on paper, the destroyed cities, the stolen things, the explosions, the repeated impossible incidents somehow involving cars, you might also have a few questions. So, Ames sees the Rome disaster and treats Dom's family like a threat that finally needs to be dealt with. On the other side, Tess, played by Brie Larson, is more willing to believe there's another layer to what happened. She is connected to Mr. Nobody, and because of that, she carries some of the older trust the agency once had in Dom's crew. She knows the family has operated in morally messy territory before, but she also understands they are not the type to casually blow up Rome for no reason. That contrast gives the agency plotline a little tension. Ames represents the system turning against Dom. Tess represents the idea that someone inside that system still believes in him. And Dante, of course, uses the whole situation to make the family look guilty while everyone else runs around trying to decide whether Dom is a hero, a criminal, or just the world's most expensive insurance problem. The issue is that this part of the movie also adds to the clutter. Because Fast X already has a lot going on. Dante's revenge, Dom protecting his son, Letty separated from the group, Cypher floating around the edges, Roman, Tej, Han, and Ramsey stuck in their own subplot. Jacob on his road trip adventure, returning characters, new characters, surprise appearances, and now we also have agency politics layered over the whole thing. Some of it works because it gives the movie a wider scale. Dom's crew isn't just running from Dante, they're running from institutions, surveillance, official power, and people who now see them as liabilities. That helps the story feel bigger than a personal revenge mission. But it also means the movie is constantly cutting away from one thread to service another, and that's where the agency material becomes a mixed bag. Alan Ritchson brings the right kind of hard-edged presence, and Brie Larson adds a calmer, more sympathetic energy, but neither character gets enough breathing room to fully reshape the movie. They are useful pieces on the board, not necessarily fully developed people yet. Still, their presence makes sense for where the franchise is now. This is no longer a story about street racers dodging local cops. Those days are gone. Dom's family has become entangled with global agencies, black ops prisons, international threats, and villains who somehow have unlimited resources. So, the agency plotline is basically the franchise admitting what it has turned into. A car-based spy universe where loyalty matters more than law, and where the government is always one dramatic misunderstanding away from hunting the people who saved them last time. It's messy, but it fits. Because in Fast X, everyone is either chasing Dom, helping Dom, betraying Dom, or waiting to become family later. From there, Fast X does what modern Fast and Furious snoobies always do now. It turns the world into one giant racetrack. We're not just staying in one city anymore. Those days are long gone. This franchise started with street corners, garages, and local racing culture. And now every sequel feels like someone opened a travel brochure and asked, which country haven't we destroyed yet? So this movie jumps around. Rome, Brazil, London, Portugal, Antarctica. A little Los Angeles energy in there too. It keeps moving, sometimes so quickly that the locations feel less like places and more like expensive backdrops for the next chase, fight, reveal, or dramatic stare. And honestly, that globe-trotting scale is part of the franchise's identity now. The movie wants to feel huge. It wants to feel like Dom's family is not just dealing with one enemy, but being hunted across the planet. Dante's revenge is personal, but the stage is international. That gives the film a kind of blockbuster momentum, where every new location is supposed to raise the stakes and make the conflict feel bigger than anything before. Rome gives us the bomb chase. Brazil brings the story back to old franchise territory, which makes sense because Dante's anger comes from that history. London and the other stops help spread the characters across different threads. Portugal becomes the place where everything crashes into that cliffhanger ending. And Antarctica is there because, well, at this point, why not? The series already went to space. Cold weather is basically restraint. But the problem with this kind of structure is that movement is not the same thing as momentum. Sometimes Fast X feels like it is going somewhere. Other times, it feels like it is just changing locations to convince you the story is progressing. The characters are split up, the plot is scattered, and every few minutes the movie seems to remember another subplot it needs to check in on. So you get this constant sense of motion, but not always a strong sense of direction. That is where the globe-trotting becomes both impressive and exhausting. On one hand, the scale is undeniable. This is a massive production, and you can feel the movie trying to give audiences that international event film experience. Big cities, famous landmarks, secret hideouts, impossible roads, high-speed chaos, it's all there. On the other hand, the more places the movie visits, the less time it has to make any of them feel meaningful. Rome is memorable because of the bomb. Brazil matters because of the Fast 5 connection. But some of the other stops feel like the franchise just checking the global spectacle box. Still, I get the appeal. There is something naturally fun about watching this ridiculous family drama spill across the world. It makes the revenge plot feel oversized in the way only this series can manage. Dante is not just attacking Dom in one place, he is turning the entire map into a trap. And for a movie that is supposed to begin the endgame, that scale makes sense. Even if, by the time the film has jumped from one country to another and another, you may start to wonder whether the characters are actually traveling, or if they're just being teleported by sequel logic. The biggest structural problem with Fast XX is that the movie is not just big, it is crowded. There is a difference. A big movie can still feel clean if it knows where to focus. Fast XTC has the opposite problem. It has Dom's revenge story with Dante. It has the crew being framed. It has the agency hunting them. It has Letty separated into her own thread. It has Cypher hanging around the edges. It has Jakob protecting Little B. It has Roman, Tej, Han, and Ramsey doing their own thing. It has returning characters, new characters, surprise characters, and characters who appear just long enough for you to go, oh right, they're still in this franchise. After a while, the movie starts to feel less like one story and more like several trailers stitched together. Some of these subplots are fun on their own. Some have a nice bit of energy. Some clearly exist because the franchise has become too large to ignore anyone completely. But when everything is happening at once, the emotional focus gets blurry. You can feel the movie trying to give every member of the family something to do, but not every thread feels equally necessary. That's where the clutter kicks in. The film keeps cutting away from Dom's main conflict with Dante to check in on different groups, and every time it does, the momentum resets a little. 1 minute we're dealing with revenge and family destruction. Then we're in another location with a separate mini-adventure. Then we're back to agency business. Then someone from the past shows up. Then another character gets a reveal. It is busy, constantly busy, but not always satisfying. And because this is supposed to be the beginning of the finale, the movie also has to carry the weight of setup. It is not only trying to tell its own story, it is preparing the next one, maybe even the next two. So instead of feeling like a complete meal, Fast XX sometimes feels like a huge table covered with appetizers, callbacks, teases, and unfinished plates. That can be exciting if you love this universe. But it can also be tiring. The franchise has reached a point where its own history is starting to weigh it down. Every old friend, old enemy, lost relative, secret connection, and surprise return has to be accounted for somehow. The result is a story that keeps expanding outward when it probably needed to tighten inward. Because the best part of the movie is simple, Dante wants revenge on Dom. That is the clean emotional engine. Everything else should support that. But too often, the film gets distracted by its own size. It keeps reminding you how many characters exist, how many places they can go, how many threads are still active. And after a while, you start wishing it would just slow down and choose a lane, which is a strange thing to say about a movie called Fast XXRS. But honestly, this one could have used a little more focus and a little less traffic. And connected to that clutter is the cast. Because of Fast XX has an absolutely ridiculous number of people in it. At some point, watching this movie starts to feel like attending a franchise reunion where every guest needs at least one dramatic entrance, one callback, one fight scene, or one tiny emotional reminder that they mattered in a previous chapter. The cast list is stacked to the point where it almost becomes funny. You have the core crew, the newer additions, the old villains, the government people, the surprise returns, the family members, the extended family members, and then the people who show up for what feels like 30 seconds before the movie sprints away from them. And look, that can be part of the fun. One of the weird pleasures of these later Fast and Furious Haas movies is seeing how many characters the franchise can keep alive inside the same universe. Someone who was an enemy 3 movies ago can now be an ally. Someone who disappeared years ago can suddenly walk back in. Someone who should probably be dead can return with a very casual explanation, or sometimes barely any explanation at all. It gives the series this soap opera quality, where the door is never really closed on anyone. But in Fast X, the roster is so big that the movie struggles to give people actual purpose. A lot of characters are not really driving the story anymore. They are just present because the franchise has collected them over the years and now doesn't know who to leave behind. That's the danger of building a family this large. The word family sounds warm and emotional, but structurally, it becomes a nightmare. Every character needs screen time. Every actor needs something to do. Every fan favorite needs a moment. So instead of one tight team working together, the movie spreads everyone across different corners of the plot and hopes the audience will enjoy the check-ins. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. There are characters who genuinely add energy. There are also characters who feel like they were included because the movie was afraid fans would ask where they were, and that makes the film feel overloaded in a way that even the action can't always hide. The cast is impressive on paper, no doubt. Vin Diesel, Michelle Rodriguez, Jason Momoa, Charlize Theron, Jason Statham, John Cena, Brie Larson, Alan Ritchson, Helen Mirren, Sung Kang, Ludacris, Tyrese Gibson, Nathalie Emmanuel, Jordana Brewster, and that's not even getting into every smaller appearance or surprise return. But an impressive cast is not the same thing as a balanced movie. And that is where Fast X feels weaker than it should. It has all these pieces, but it does not always know how to use them. Some characters get too much time, some get almost none. Some disappear right when you want the movie to follow them. Others stay around long enough to remind you that not every subplot needed to be here. It is the kind of movie where you can feel the franchise's success becoming its own problem. The family got bigger, the universe got bigger, the stakes got bigger. But the storytelling space did not magically expand enough to handle all of it. So instead of feeling epic all the time, the huge cast sometimes makes the movie feel crowded, distracted, and weirdly unfocused. Everyone is invited to the party, but not everyone gets a good seat at the table. And then there are the cameos and returning characters, which have basically become their own side business inside this franchise. Fast X doesn't just bring people back. It brings them back with the confidence of a movie that assumes you have kept a mental spreadsheet of every alliance, betrayal, fake death, sibling reveal, villain redemption, and post-credit tease from the last 15 years. If you haven't, good luck. The movie is not really slowing down to help you. Some returns are fun, to be fair. There is still a little thrill in seeing familiar faces walk back into this world. Jason Statham shows up, and even if his role is smaller than you might want, he still has that easy screen presence where the movie instantly feels more energetic. Charlize Theron's Cypher is still around, and even when the film doesn't use her as much as it could, her presence reminds you that this universe has become much bigger than Dom's original crew. Helen Mirren pops in with that strange royal elegance she somehow brings to these movies, even when the material around her is completely ridiculous. And honestly, part of the appeal of Fast and Furious Us now is wondering who might return next. The franchise has trained the audience to never fully trust an exit. A character can vanish, switch sides, come back years later, get folded into the family, or appear in a mid-credit scene like they were waiting in storage. It's almost become a game. Who's back? Who's secretly alive? Who's getting a redemption arc? Who gets a dramatic entrance with music swelling like we're supposed to cheer before we even process why they're here? That can be entertaining, but it also creates a problem. Because a cameo is only exciting for a moment. After that, the movie still has to use the character well, and Fast X doesn't always do that. Some appearances feel less like meaningful story choices and more like reminders that the franchise has a very large contact list. Characters show up, give the audience a little spark of recognition, and then the movie rushes to the next subplot. That's where the returns start to feel random. You can tell the film wants to create that big finale energy, where everyone from the past might have some role to play before the saga ends. On paper, that makes sense. If this really is the road toward the final chapter, of course the franchise wants to bring back old allies, old enemies, and familiar faces. It wants the audience to feel the history. But history can become clutter when it isn't shaped properly. Instead of every return feeling essential, some of them feel like the movie is collecting characters just to prove it can. And because the cast is already overloaded, every cameo steals a little oxygen from someone else. You start asking whether a character is back because the story needs them, or because the franchise wants one more cheer from the crowd. That's the tricky balance. Fast XX doesn't always manage. The returning faces give the movie scale. They make it feel like this whole long, messy saga is circling back on itself. But they also expose how complicated the franchise has become. There are so many people in play now that the movie can barely pause long enough to let any one return actually land. So yes, it's fun seeing some of these characters again. But after a while, the surprise of "look who's back" starts to matter less than the question the movie doesn't always answer. Okay, now what are you going to do with them? One of the strangest things about this franchise now is that death barely feels like death anymore. And I know, that sounds dramatic, but with Fast and Furious, it's kind of true. Characters leave, characters vanish, characters appear to die, and then a few movies later, the franchise finds a way to bring them back with a straight face. Sometimes it's emotional, sometimes it's fun. Sometimes it feels like the movie is quietly asking you not to remember too many details. The problem is, after a while, the stakes start to get weaker. Because if anyone can come back, then what does danger really mean here? This is especially noticeable in Fast X because the movie is clearly trying to feel like a major endgame chapter. It wants the audience to feel that the family is in real danger, that Dante can hurt them, that the road ahead is darker and more uncertain than usual. But when the series has already trained us to believe that exits are negotiable, it becomes harder to fully buy into the threat. A crash happens, an explosion happens, someone disappears, and instead of feeling devastated, part of your brain goes, okay, but are they actually gone, or are we waiting 2 movies for the dramatic return? That's not always the audience's fault. The franchise built that habit itself. And listen, I'm not saying every return is bad. Some of them are crowd-pleasing, some characters are genuinely beloved, and seeing them again can create that big franchise excitement. Han coming back, for example, gave fans something they had wanted for a long time. The issue is that once a story keeps reversing emotional consequences, it accidentally teaches us not to trust the emotions. Death becomes less of a loss and more of a scheduling problem. That matters in Fast X because the film ends with massive danger hanging over several characters. It wants you to leave the theater shocked, worried, maybe even desperate for the next chapter. But because this franchise is played so loosely with survival, the cliffhanger lands with a little bit of doubt built in. You're not just wondering what happens next, you're wondering how much of it will actually count. And that undercuts Dante too. If his whole mission is to destroy Dom's family, then the movie needs us to believe he can really do damage. Not just blow up cars, not just frame people, not just create temporary chaos, real damage, permanent damage. Emotional damage that cannot be undone by a surprise cameo or a casual explanation later. But the franchise has made permanence difficult. That's the danger of turning every character into a possible return. It keeps the universe alive, sure, but it also makes the drama feel safer than it should. And for a finale arc, safety is the last thing you want the audience to feel. Fast X wants to convince us the end of the road is dangerous. The franchise's own history keeps whispering, don't worry too much, they've escaped worse. The frustrating part is that Fast X has characters you actually want to spend more time with. That's what makes the overcrowding feel worse. It's not just that the movie has too many people. It's that some of the most interesting people are pushed to the side while less interesting material gets stretched out longer than it probably should. Take Deckard Shaw, for example. Jason Statham walks into these movies with a very specific kind of energy. He doesn't need much setup. He doesn't need a speech. He just needs a room, a few unlucky people standing in his way, and maybe one sharply delivered line before the violence starts. Every time he shows up, the film immediately feels like it has found another gear. But in Fast XX, he's barely used. You get enough of him to remember how fun he can be, and then the movie moves on. Which is annoying, because in a film this messy, Statham's clean, physical, no-nonsense action presence could have been a nice counterweight to all the scattered plotting. Charlize Theron has a similar problem as Cypher. She's one of the bigger names in this franchise, and the character should feel dangerous just by being in the room. But again, she gets folded into the larger machinery of the plot instead of really dominating it. The movie keeps reminding us that Cypher matters, but it doesn't always give her enough space to prove it, and that becomes a pattern. Helen Mirren appears, brings class and warmth because she's Helen Mirren and apparently can do that in any universe, even one where cars regularly ignore God's design. But her role still feels more like a touch point than a fully developed piece of the story. Other familiar faces return or hover at the edges, and you can feel the movie wanting you to appreciate the reunion without necessarily giving every character a strong reason to be there. That's where Fast X feels wasteful. Not wasteful because the actors are bad. Most of them know exactly what kind of movie they're in. Some of them are clearly ready to bring more flavor than the script allows. But the film is so busy setting up its finale, servicing old history, introducing new players, and giving Dante room to perform, that several major characters end up feeling like expensive decorations. They're there, they look cool, they remind you of other movies, then they're gone. And that's a shame, because one of the strengths of this franchise used to be the way different personalities bounced off each other. The team dynamic mattered, the chemistry mattered. Even when the plots were ridiculous, the characters had space to feel like a crew. Here, the crew often feels separated by franchise obligation. Everyone has a lane, but not everyone has a journey. Some characters get a joke, some get a fight, some get a dramatic entrance, some get a tease for later, but very few get enough time to really breathe. and maybe that's the cost of making See Fast X's feel like a giant event movie. You bring everyone back so the world feels big, but then the movie becomes too crowded to use them properly. So instead of thinking, wow, look at all these great characters, you start thinking, why is this person here for only 2 minutes? That's not the reaction a finale setup should create. If this really is the beginning of the end, then these characters deserve more than attendance marks. They deserve moments that feel earned, not just appearances that remind us the franchise still has their phone numbers. The new additions in Fast XX are interesting because they show just how large this universe has become. At this point, the franchise isn't just bringing back old faces. It's still adding more people to an already packed table. And somehow, even with a cast that feels like it could fill an airport terminal, the movie finds room for Brie Larson, Alan Ritchson, Daniela Melchior, Rita Moreno, and a few other fresh pieces in the larger puzzle. Some of them work better than others. Brie Larson's Tess is probably the cleanest fit, mostly because she enters the story with a clear function. She is connected to Mr. Nobody, she believes Dom's crew may not be guilty, and she gives the movie a small bridge back to the older agency dynamic. She's not just another random new face thrown into the chaos. She has a reason to be there, even if the film doesn't always give her enough time to become as important as it wants her to feel. Larson brings a calmer energy to the movie, which helps. In a story full of yelling, explosions, betrayals, and Jason Momoa behaving like revenge, came with a costume budget, Tess feels more grounded. She is not the loudest character in the room, but she gives Dom someone inside the system who can still see the truth beneath Dante's setup. Then there's Alan Ritchson as Ames, who gives the agency side a more aggressive edge. He steps in as the guy who does not automatically trust Dom, and honestly, that makes sense. From the outside, Dom's crew probably looks insane. Everywhere they go, something explodes. Every mission becomes international news. Every explanation sounds like something a criminal would say if he had really good friends and very fast cars. So Ames being suspicious adds a little friction. He is not there to admire the family legacy. He is there to treat them like a problem. Daniela Melchior's character brings the movie back toward Brazil and the emotional shadow of Fast Fives. Her presence helps connect the new revenge story to the older history, which is important because Dante's entire motivation depends on that past still mattering. Again, the movie is too crowded to fully explore everyone, but her role at least has a meaningful connection to the plot. And then Rita Moreno appears as Dom's grandmother, adding another layer to the family mythology. It is a small piece, but it fits the franchise's obsession with roots, loyalty, bloodlines, and the idea that family history is basically sacred scripture. Her presence is not about action. It's about giving the Toretto family another emotional anchor. The problem is not that these new characters are bad. The problem is that S-Fast XX is already carrying too much. So even when the additions are enjoyable, they're fighting for space in a movie that barely has enough room for the people already here. Tess could use more development. Ames could use more complexity. The Brazil connection could have had more emotional weight. Rita Moreno could have been more than a brief family blessing before the movie speeds off again. Still, these characters do add something. They make the world feel bigger. They bring new textures into a franchise that can easily get trapped repeating the same dynamics. And in a movie that is clearly setting up the final stretch, you can see why the filmmakers wanted fresh energy alongside the old family members. But that is also the risk. When a franchise is this close to the end, every new face has to justify its seat at the table. Some do, some almost do. Some feel like setup for later. And that's very Fast XX, always adding more horsepower, even when the engine is already overloaded. One of the more surprising things that actually works in Fast XX is the pairing between Jacob and Little B. And I say surprising because Jacob's character has had a strange journey. In F9, he was introduced with all this heavy long-lost brother drama, built up as this serious shadow from Dom's past. It was very intense, very family trauma, very much the franchise trying to convince us that yet another secret connection had always been there. But in See Fast X, John Cena feels almost like he's been released from that version of the character. Suddenly, Jacob is lighter, goofier, more playful. He is still capable, obviously, because everyone in this franchise is somehow capable of surviving military-level danger with very little concern for biology. But Cena gets to bring more comedy into the role this time, and honestly, it suits him much better. His scenes with Little B have this odd road trip energy that gives the movie a little breathing room away from the main chaos. While Dom is dealing with Dante, the agency, and the usual end-of-the-world family pressure, Jakob is off trying to protect Dom's son in a way that feels more relaxed and unexpectedly charming. It's not deep, exactly, but it's fun, and in a movie this crowded fun matters. The dynamic works because Cena has a natural warmth when he's allowed to be silly. He is big enough to sell the action, but he also has that slightly ridiculous comic timing that makes his scenes feel less stiff than some of the heavier material around him. With Little B, he gets to play protector, uncle, action hero, and oversized kid all at once. There's a sweetness to it. The franchise has always cared about chosen family, but here we get a smaller version of that idea, not another speech around a table. Not another dramatic declaration about loyalty, just a strange little bond forming on the move, with Jakob trying to keep this kid safe while also turning the journey into something almost adventurous. And that helps, because Little B could have easily become just a plot device. Dom's son is obviously important because Dante wants to hurt Dom through the people he loves. But the movie needs him to feel like more than a symbol of Dom's vulnerability. Putting him with Jakob gives him actual scenes, actual interaction, and a little personality inside the larger chase. Is it tonally consistent with the rest of the movie? Not always. There are moments where the Jacob and Little B material feels like it belongs to a slightly different film. Maybe a buddy comedy, maybe a spin-off, maybe something where the stakes are lower and everyone is having more fun. But compared to some of the more forced subplots, this one at least has a pulse. It gives Cena something better to do. It gives Little B a place in the story beyond being protected. And it gives S Fast X a rare stretch where the family theme feels less like a slogan and more like an actual relationship happening in front of us. For a movie this loud, that smaller charm is easy to appreciate. What's funny is that Jakob in Minus Fast XX barely feels like the same guy from SF9's, and usually that would be a problem. Actually, it still kind of is. The shift is so noticeable that you can't fully ignore it. In the previous film, Jakob was introduced with this heavy emotional baggage as Dom's estranged brother, this serious rival figure carrying years of resentment and family history. The movie treated him like a major dramatic reveal, almost like the franchise had uncovered some buried chapter in Dom's life that changed everything. Then Fast X comes along and basically says, what if he was fun now? And honestly, it works better. It doesn't make a ton of sense emotionally if you're tracking the character from one movie to the next with any real seriousness. But seriousness is not exactly the franchise's most reliable currency at this point. What matters more is whether the version of Jakob we get here is entertaining, and Cena is clearly more comfortable playing him with a lighter touch. He gets to be goofy, he gets to be warm, he gets to bounce off Little B instead of standing around looking haunted by Toretto family trauma. And because Cena has a natural gift for comedy, the movie benefits from letting him loosen up. There's something almost refreshing about it. So much of Fast XX is weighed down by legacy. Every character is carrying history, revenge, guilt, loyalty, betrayal, or some secret connection to a previous film. Jakob, strangely enough, becomes one of the few characters who feels like he's allowed to just enjoy being in the movie. He's still part of the family drama, but he's not drowning in it anymore. That doesn't mean the transition is smooth. If you go directly from F9 into F9 SFSX, the change is a little jarring. It feels less like natural character growth, and more like the filmmakers realize Cena is much more fun when he's not being forced into the grim brother role. And to be fair, they were right. But you can still feel the adjustment happening on screen. It's almost like the movie quietly retools Jacob without making a big deal out of it. 1 minute he was this serious figure from Dom's painful past. Now he's the cool uncle in an action comedy road trip, protecting Dom's son and cracking jokes while danger follows them around. It's absurd, but somehow more enjoyable than what came before. And that's kind of the trade-off with this franchise now. Continuity matters until it gets in the way of fun. Character consistency matters until the movie decides a different version would play better. Emotional history matters until someone needs to become comic relief with a heart. In Jakob's case, I can't even be too mad about it, because the new version is more entertaining. Cena brings more personality, more charm, and more life to the role this time. The writing may not fully earn the shift, but the performance makes the shift easy to accept. So yes, Jakob's character change is strange. But in a movie full of impossible stunts, fake deaths, secret relatives, and cars doing things cars should never do, A personality upgrade might be one of the easier things to forgive. Then we get the Roman, Tej, Han, and Ramsey side of the movie, and this is where this Fast X starts to feel a little more uneven. Because this group should work. On paper, it makes sense. These are familiar characters, they have history together, and the franchise has used their banter before to break up the heavier Dom-centered material. Roman panics, Tej argues with him, Ramsey handles the tech, Han brings that calm, cool guy energy, and the whole thing is supposed to feel like the lighter side of the family. But in this movie, a lot of that material feels forced. Their subplot has that familiar rhythm of a mini-mission gone wrong, with the crew trying to survive after being framed and separated from Dom. The problem is that the scenes don't always have enough urgency or personality to stand on their own. Instead of feeling like a fun side adventure, it sometimes feels like the movie is checking in on them because it has to. And the banter? Yeah, the banter is rough in places. Roman and Tej have always had that bickering friendship, but here some of the jokes feel tired. Not terrible every second, but definitely stretched. You can feel the movie reaching for that old comic chemistry, hoping the audience will laugh because these characters have made them laugh before. But familiarity is not the same thing as freshness. After a while, the back and forth starts to sound less like natural friendship and more like people performing a routine they have done too many times. Han is there too, and Sung Kang still has that relaxed presence that makes him easy to watch. But the movie doesn't really give him enough sharp material. Ramsey also gets pulled into the group dynamic, but again, she mostly feels like the tech-smart member who exists to keep the plot moving when the story needs a quick explanation. That's the issue with this whole subplot. It has characters we know, but not enough reason to be invested in what they're doing beyond the fact that they're part of the family. And in a movie already packed with subplots, a weaker side thread becomes very noticeable. Every time the film cuts away from Dante, or Dom, or the more interesting pieces of the story, you want the detour to justify itself. This one only partly does. There are moments where the group still has some charm. Roman's fear, Tej's irritation, Han's coolness, Ramsey's competence. Those ingredients can still work when the scene has the right energy. But too often, Fast X leans on the idea of their chemistry instead of actually writing strong scenes for them. And that's disappointing because these characters used to feel like a team with specific skills. They weren't just comic relief or background family members. They had a function. They contributed to the mission. They helped make the impossible feel like a coordinated plan. Here, their subplot sometimes feels more like filler between the bigger moments. Not useless exactly, but thin. And when the movie is already fighting against clutter, thin subplots are dangerous. They slow down the momentum. They make the runtime feel heavier, and they remind you that not every member of this enormous family is being served equally. So while Dom is dealing with the emotional weight of Dante's revenge, and Dante is busy stealing the movie every time he appears, Roman, Tej, Han, and Ramsey are stuck in a thread that should be funnier, tighter, and more memorable than it actually is. The characters deserve better. And honestly, so does the audience. The comedy in Fast X is a strange thing, because sometimes the movie is funny on purpose, sometimes it is funny by accident, and sometimes it tries so hard to be funny that you can almost hear the joke running out of fuel halfway through. And honestly, that has been part of the franchise for a while now. These movies have never been completely serious, even when Dom is speaking like he's delivering ancient wisdom from the hood of a Dodge Charger. There has always been some room for jokes, especially through Roman and Tej, or through the sheer absurdity of the action itself. When a car does something no machine on Earth should survive, part of the entertainment is laughing at the madness. But Fast X pushes that tone in a way that feels uneven. Some of the humor works because the movie seems aware of how ridiculous it has become. There are little moments where it almost feels like the film is looking at its own history, the family speeches, the impossible physics, the endless returns, and having a bit of fun with the audience. That kind of self-awareness can be enjoyable. It gives the movie permission to be silly without pretending every single second is sacred. And then there's Dante. A lot of the best comedy comes from him, weirdly enough. Jason Momoa plays the character with this mischievous, offbeat energy that turns even villain scenes into something oddly playful. He'll do something cruel, then undercut it with a joke or a pose or some bizarre little flourish, and you're not always sure whether you should laugh, feel uncomfortable, or both. That actually gives the movie some flavor. But the broader comedy, that's where things get shaky. Roman and TJ's banter, in particular, feels like it's running on old fumes. The franchise clearly remembers that people enjoyed their back and forth in earlier films, so it keeps giving them arguments, insults, panic jokes, and little comic reactions. But in Chef a lot of it feels less spontaneous and more like the movie pressing the Roman and Tige comedy button, because that's what usually happens around this point. Sometimes it lands, sometimes it really doesn't. There are jokes that feel stale, scenes that drag longer than they should, and cameos that seem designed to get a quick reaction rather than actually add anything funny. And when the comedy doesn't work, it makes the crowded structure feel even more obvious. You're not laughing because the scene is sharp. You're waiting for the movie to get back to the parts that matter. That's the risk with a franchise this self-aware. Once the movie knows people are laughing at it, it has to decide whether to lean into the joke or protect the emotional core. Fast X tries to do both. It wants to be outrageous and sincere, goofy and dramatic, cartoonish and heartfelt. Sometimes that combination is exactly why the franchise is entertaining. Other times, the tones clash so hard that the movie feels like several different versions of itself fighting for the steering wheel. And yet, I wouldn't say the comedy completely fails. The silliness is part of the package now. If you're still watching this franchise at movie 10, you probably have some tolerance for dumb jokes, over-the-top reactions, and characters saying ridiculous things with complete confidence. That's part of the ride. But the best humor in Fast XX comes when the movie lets the absurdity breathe naturally. The weakest humor comes when it feels like a routine, and unfortunately, there is a lot of routine here. With Fast XX, Louis Leterrier steps into the director's chair, and honestly, you can feel why he made sense for this job. This is not a franchise that needs quiet restraint at this point. It needs someone who can handle chaos, movement, absurd action geography, and a cast list that looks like it was assembled by someone refusing to say no to anybody. Leterrier has worked in this kind of muscular, glossy action space before, so on paper, he feels like a natural fit for a late-stage Fast and Furious Harris's movie. And to his credit, the film does move. Even when the story is messy, even when the characters are scattered across half the planet, even when the script is juggling too many threads at once, Leterrier keeps the machine running. The movie rarely sits still for long. There is always another chase, another cutaway, another reveal, another location, another piece of Dante's plan falling into place. That constant motion helps. Because if Fast X ever slowed down too much, the weaknesses would become even louder. The plot logic would have more time to collapse. The dialogue would feel heavier. The overcrowded structure would become harder to ignore. So Leterrier's biggest achievement is probably that he keeps the film feeling like a ride, even when the ride is clearly missing a few bolts. He also understands the cartoonish scale of the franchise. There's no attempt here to drag the series back into realism. The action is big, shiny, ridiculous, and often completely impossible. And Leterrier mostly directs it with the attitude that, yes, this is absurd, but the absurdity is now part of the texture. A giant bomb rolling through Rome? Sure. A damn climax that treats physics like a suggestion? Fine. Characters surviving things that would turn normal humans into dust? That's just Tuesday in this universe. The issue is that direction can only solve so much. Leterrier can keep the pace up, he can make the set pieces loud, and he can give Dante room to steal the screen, but he can't fully fix a story that is trying to serve too many masters. The movie still feels scattered. Some subplots still feel thin. Some emotional beats still feel rushed. Some action scenes look more digital than thrilling. So his direction is energetic, but not always elegant. You can feel him trying to control a franchise that has become almost too large for one movie. It's like directing traffic during a citywide car chase. There are too many vehicles, too many directions, too many people yelling into earpieces, and somehow he still has to make it feel like one coherent event. Sometimes he manages it. Sometimes the film gets away from him. But I don't think Fast X feels lifeless from a directing standpoint. It has movement. It has scale. It has a willingness to embrace the ridiculous. And in the moments where the movie is simply trying to be a loud, over-the-top blockbuster, Leterrier mostly delivers what this franchise asks for. The bigger problem is that Fast XX does not just need a director who can handle speed. It needs a story that knows where it's going. And that part is much less consistent. There's also an interesting behind-the-scenes shadow hanging over Fast X, and that's Justin Lin. Even if Louis Leterrier is the director who actually carries this movie to the finish line, Lin's fingerprints are still part of the franchise's DNA. You can't really talk about modern Fast and Furious without talking about him. He helped shape the series into what it became, not just a street racing franchise, but a full-blown action saga with heists, spy missions, impossible stunts, and an increasingly tangled family mythology. So when Too Fast X reaches back to see Fast 5, it is not just borrowing from an old plot point. It is reaching back to one of the defining chapters of the Lin era. That matters, because Fast 5 was the movie that changed everything. It took the franchise out of its smaller world and made it bigger, louder, and more confident. The vault chase in Rio wasn't just another set piece. It was the moment the series basically announced, okay, we're something else now. And Fast X builds its entire villain motivation from that moment. So even with a new director behind the camera, the story is still tied to Lin's legacy. At the same time, there is a slightly strange feeling to the creative shift. Fast XX is supposed to begin the final stretch of the saga, but it also feels like a movie that changed drivers mid-race. You can sense pieces of an older plan still inside it. The callbacks, the family mythology, the attempt to connect the ending back to the past, while Leterrier brings his own action-heavy rhythm to the finished film. And maybe that explains some of the unevenness. The movie has the weight of franchise history, but also the energy of someone trying to keep a massive machine from crashing after a sudden handoff. It wants to honor what came before, set up what comes next, service a huge cast, and still deliver enough spectacle to justify being called Fast XX. That is a lot for any director to balance, especially in a series where every sequel has to be bigger than the last one. Lin's exit also makes the family obsession feel a little ironic, honestly. This franchise constantly talks about loyalty, unity, staying together, never turning your back on the people who built the ride with you. And yet behind the scenes, the movie itself had to move forward without one of the key creative voices who helped build its modern identity. You don't need to turn that into drama to feel the shift. It's there in the texture of the film. Fast X feels like a movie caught between continuation and transition. It is still using Lin-era mythology, especially with the Fast 5 retcon, but Leterrier is the one pushing it through this newer, louder, more chaotic chapter. Sometimes that combination works, sometimes it feels stitched together, and that might be the most honest way to describe the film's creative identity. It is not a complete reset. It is not fully clean continuation either. It is a handoff. Noisy, expensive, overstuffed, occasionally exciting, occasionally messy, from the version of the franchise that made it huge to the version now trying to figure out how to finally end it. At the end of the day, though, most people are not coming to Fast X for airtight plotting. They're coming for the action. That has been the franchise's main currency for a long time now. The cars, the chases, the crashes, the impossible escapes, the kind of stunt ideas that sound like they were pitched by someone saying, okay, but what if we made it even stupider? And I don't even mean that as an insult. That stupidity is part of the appeal when it's done with confidence. The Fast and Furious movies understand spectacle in a very blunt way. They don't tap you on the shoulder. They slam through the wall, flip a car over your head, drop a one-liner, and then ask you to care about family 5 seconds later. And Fast XX absolutely continues that tradition. There are giant chases, explosions, fights, cars getting launched, vehicles surviving things they have no business surviving, and action scenes designed less around realism and more around escalation. Every set piece seems to ask the same question: how do we make this feel bigger than something we already did before? That's both the strength and the trap of the franchise. Because when the action works, it still has that ridiculous blockbuster charge. You can feel the movie trying to give the audience a reason to sit up, laugh, react, and just let the madness wash over them. The Rome sequence, the Brazil race, the dam climax, these are not small moments. They are built to be loud, theatrical, and impossible to ignore. But the series has gone so far beyond reality that the action doesn't always create tension anymore. Sometimes you're not wondering if the characters will survive. You're wondering what new law of physics the movie will politely ignore next. And that changes the experience. In the earlier films, even when things were exaggerated, there was still a little grit to the action. You felt cars on roads, you felt bodies in danger, you felt the weight of the chase. Now, the spectacle is so enormous that it can sometimes feel weightless. A car doesn't just drive fast. It flies, swings, shields, launches, crashes, lands, and keeps going because the franchise has decided mechanical damage is more of a suggestion than a fact. Still, I'd be lying if I said none of it is entertaining. There is a reason people keep showing up for these movies, even when they complain about them. The action scratches a very specific itch. It is not refined, it is not subtle, it is not always well written around, but it is big, glossy, and shameless in a way that few modern franchises still are. Fast X knows that. Even when the plot gets cluttered, even when the dialogue gets corny, even when the character work feels thin, the movie can always fall back on motion. Put someone behind the wheel, blow something up, send the crew across another city, give Dom a vehicle and a completely impossible task, and somehow the film finds its rhythm again. That is the franchise's safety net, and also maybe its biggest limitation, because action can carry a Fast and Furious movie pretty far. It has carried this series across decades, across continents, and apparently into space. But at this stage, action alone is not enough to make everything feel fresh. The movie still needs stakes, it still needs focus, it still needs a reason for the chaos to matter. Fast X gives you the spectacle. The question is whether you still feel the impact underneath all that noise. The Rome bomb chase is one of those sequences where Fast XX is basically saying, "You came here for nonsense, so here is nonsense with a passport." And honestly, as a pure idea, it is very Fast and Furious. A giant spherical bomb rolling through Rome like some evil cousin of the Boulder from X-Raiders of the Lost Ark. While cars race after it, cops chase the cars, and Dom tries to somehow solve the situation with horsepower. It is ridiculous before it even starts. But ridiculous is not automatically a problem in this franchise. Sometimes ridiculous is exactly the point. The sequence has scale, I'll give it that. Rome gives the action a strong backdrop. The streets, the landmarks, the old-world beauty being threatened by this absurd rolling weapon. Visually, there is a fun contrast there. The movie wants the city to feel like a playground and a disaster zone at the same time. And watching the crew deal with a bomb that is literally too big and too stupid to ignore does have that old fast energy for a while. It's loud, it's frantic, it's completely impossible. But it is also the kind of set piece where you can feel the franchise pushing itself into cartoon territory again. Not just bending physics, not just exaggerating action, full cartoon logic. The bomb rolls exactly where the scene needs it to roll. Cars take punishment that should end the chase instantly. Dom makes decisions that only make sense if you accept that he has some spiritual connection with engines, timing, and divine luck. And depending on your tolerance for that, the scene either works as absurd spectacle or collapses into comedy. For me, it sits somewhere in the middle. There is fun in the chaos. You can see the movie trying to create one of those signature franchise moments, the kind of sequence people talk about after leaving the theater. Remember the safe chase? Remember the submarine? Remember when they went to space? Now it wants you to say, remember the giant bomb in Rome? And sure, you remember it. But remembering a set piece is not the same as feeling it. That's where the scene struggles a little, because the action is so huge and so digitally polished that it sometimes loses weight. You're not always feeling the danger of a real object tearing through real streets. You're watching a massive CGI disaster unfold with characters who have survived so much already that suspense becomes difficult. Still, as an opening action statement, it does its job. It tells you exactly what kind of movie this is going to be. Big, silly, expensive, overcomplicated, and completely uninterested in behaving like normal action cinema. It also gives Dante his first major move against the family, turning a spectacle into a trap and using the chaos to frame them. So the Rome bomb chase is not just an action scene. It is the movie's launch button. It starts the manhunt. It splits the crew. It gives the film its first big dose of ridiculous disaster. And even if the writing around it is shaky, even if the logic is hanging by a thread, you can't accuse the sequence of being small. This franchise does not know how to be small anymore, and Rome gets the full reminder. The Brazil street race is where Fast X tries to bring back a little bit of that older franchise flavor. Not completely, of course. This is still late-stage Fast and Furious, so even a street race can't just be a street race anymore. It has to come with revenge, history, family trauma, villain mind games, and at least one emotional connection to a previous movie. But still, compared to the giant bomb in Rome or the huge finale later on, the Brazil sequence feels a little closer to the roots of the series, and that helps. because for all the spy missions and world-saving chaos this franchise has turned into, there is something naturally satisfying about seeing it return to cars lined up on the street, engines growling, people watching, tension building before the race begins. That used to be the heartbeat of these movies. Before the submarines, before the space jokes, before the secret agencies and global threats, it was about cars, pride, territory, and people proving themselves behind the wheel. So when the movie brings Dom, Dante, and Elena's sister into that street racing environment, there's a little spark of familiarity. It doesn't feel grounded exactly, nothing in Fast X really does. But it does feel like the film briefly remembers where this whole thing started. The race gives the movie a chance to slow the chaos down, just enough for personality to come through. Dante gets to perform. Dom gets to be Dom. The Brazil connection gives the scene some emotional weight because this is where the past still has scars. That's what makes the sequence more interesting than just another action beat. Brazil is not random here. It connects directly to Dante's origin, to F-Fast 5, to Hernan Reyes, and to the damage Dom's crew left behind. So when the movie returns there, it feels like Dante is dragging Dom back into the scene of the crime, at least from his point of view. It's not only a race, it's a reminder. A very loud, very expensive reminder. And honestly, Dante's presence gives the scene most of its personality. He turns the race into a game, but also into a trap. He understands that Dom doesn't just drive to win. Dom drives with this almost moral seriousness, like every gear shift is connected to his personal code. Dante exploits that. He makes the race feel less about speed and more about control. That's a good villain move. The problem is, like a lot of Fast XDX, the scene is still competing with the film's larger messiness. It arrives inside a movie that is already juggling too much, so it doesn't get to breathe as much as it could. You can feel the potential for a stronger emotional confrontation here, especially because Brazil matters to the story's history. But the film is always in a hurry to move to the next big thing. Still, this sequence works better than some of the more inflated spectacle because it has a clearer identity. It ties the new villain to the old franchise. It gives Dom and Dante a more personal kind of conflict. And it reminds us, even briefly, that before this series became a superhero spy opera with cars, it knew how to build tension from a race. That older energy is still in there somewhere. Fast X just has to dig through a lot of explosions to find it. Alongside all the giant car chaos, Fast X also tries to mix in a little more physical action. And that's actually a smart move, because after this many movies, car chases alone can start to blur together. There are only so many ways to show vehicles crashing, flipping, flying, exploding, or politely ignoring physics before the audience starts to go numb. So when the movie shifts into motorcycle action or hand-to-hand fights, it gives the spectacle a slightly different texture. The motorcycle material especially fits Dante. There's something about Jason Momoa riding through Rome that feels completely in line with the character's whole personality. It's flashy, reckless, stylish, and a little ridiculous. He doesn't move like a villain trying to hide in the shadows. He moves like someone who wants everyone to see him. Even when he's part of the chaos, he seems to be enjoying the visual of it. That matters because Dante is not just a threat in this movie, he is a performance. So giving him action that feels more personal and mobile works better than just having him sit behind a screen or bark orders from some evil headquarters. The motorcycle sequences allow him to feel involved in the madness. He's not only pulling strings, he's out there in the streets, creating trouble with his own hands, or at least with his own sense of style. Then there's the hand-to-hand side of the movie. The franchise has had physical fights before, of course. This is a series where basically everyone is either a driver, a hacker, a spy, a fighter, or some combination of all four. But Fast XX seems to lean into that a bit more, giving characters moments where the conflict is not just about engines and explosions, but bodies hitting walls, punches landing, people being thrown across rooms, that kind of thing. And honestly, some of that is welcome, because physical action can make danger feel more immediate. A car chase can become abstract when it gets too digital, too huge, too impossible. But a fight scene, even a ridiculous one, can bring the danger closer. It gives the actors something to do besides stare at screens, drive through chaos, or explain why the latest impossible plan might somehow work. That said, the movie still has the usual Fast X problem. There is so much going on that not every action beat gets the space it needs. Some fights feel like quick stops between larger set pieces. Some moments are fun but don't leave a huge impression. And because the film keeps bouncing between characters and locations, the physical action doesn't always build into something as memorable as it could have been. Still, the variety helps. When the movie steps away from pure vehicle spectacle, even briefly, it gives the audience a different kind of energy. A motorcycle chase here, a fight there, a character getting to show skill outside the driver's seat. These touches keep the film from becoming one long parade of cars crashing into increasingly expensive objects. And in a franchise where the action has become almost mythological in its absurdity, the smaller physical moments can sometimes feel refreshing. Not grounded exactly. Let's not get carried away. But at least a little closer to human scale. By the time Fast X reaches the damn climax in Portugal, the movie has pretty much stopped pretending that physics is even invited to the conversation, and that's saying something for this franchise. The finale is built like one of those sequences where the filmmakers clearly asked, what's bigger than a car chase? And the answer was, apparently, a car chase with a dam, explosions, helicopters, a collapsing road, and a cliffhanger that refuses to let the movie actually end. It is enormous. No question. You can feel the film trying to deliver that final act spectacle audiences expect from a Fast and Furious movie. Dom is behind the wheel. His son is in danger. Dante is pulling strings. Everything is moving toward a massive crash of emotion, machinery, and nonsense. The scale is there, the noise is there, the danger is supposed to be there. But the whole thing also feels like the franchise pushing itself into pure superhero territory. Dom's car might as well have a cape at this point. He survives situations that no human being, no vehicle, and honestly no basic understanding of matter should survive. The dam sequence is less about suspense and more about watching the movie invent new ways for Dom to keep going, because Dom has to keep going. And depending on how much fun you're having, that can either be thrilling or hilarious. The sequence does have some dramatic purpose, though. It brings Dante's plan closer to Dom's most personal fear, losing his son. After all the talk about family, all the speeches, all the emotional mythology around Dom as protector, the movie finally puts that idea into a giant action set piece. Dom is not just trying to save the world or clear his name, he's trying to save little B. That part works. At least emotionally, you understand why the scene matters. The problem is that the action is so oversized that it starts to swallow the feeling. The more impossible the scene becomes, the less you worry about the characters and the more you watch the mechanics of the spectacle. You're not thinking, how will Dom survive? You're thinking, okay, what completely insane thing is the movie about to allow now? And then, just when it feels like the film should deliver some kind of resolution, it cuts into the big unresolved ending. That cliffhanger is probably going to divide people. On one hand, it does exactly what a Part 1 finale is supposed to do. It leaves characters in danger, teases the next chapter, and tries to make the audience feel like the story has reached a breaking point. It says, very loudly, you need to come back for the rest. On the other hand, it also makes Fast X feel incomplete, not open-ended, incomplete. There's a difference. A good cliffhanger can leave you excited while still making the movie you just watched feel satisfying. Here, the ending feels more like the film simply stops at the moment where a third act should start turning into an actual conclusion. It's less of a victory lap and more of a commercial break before the next expensive episode. And that's frustrating because the movie is already carrying so much setup. By the time it ends, you want some kind of emotional payoff, some sense that this chapter had its own shape. Instead, the Portugal climax mostly feels like a giant arrow pointing toward the sequel. So yes, the dam sequence is big, it is loud, it is completely ridiculous in that familiar Fast and Furious way. But as an ending, it leaves the movie hanging almost as much as the characters, and maybe that was the point. Still, there's a thin line between making the audience eager for the next ride and making them feel like this ride didn't fully finish. Fast X parks right on that line. The CGI in Fast X is one of those things you can't really ignore. And to be fair, this franchise has been living in digital spectacle for a long time now. We're far past the point where every chase feels like real cars on real streets doing real dangerous things. The series has become bigger than that, or maybe just less restrained than that. Now the action is built around impossible images, bombs rolling through cities, cars launching across impossible gaps, vehicles surviving explosions, people escaping situations that would turn any normal body into a warning label. So yes, F-Stex-X is heavy on effects, very heavy. Sometimes that works because the whole movie is already operating like a live-action cartoon. When Dante is acting like a comic book villain and Dom is driving like gravity personally owes him money, the slightly unreal look of the action can almost fit the tone. The movie is not pretending to be gritty street-level cinema anymore. It is a massive, expensive, exaggerated blockbuster machine, but there are also moments where the CGI becomes distracting. The fire effects, the crashes, the huge digital environments. Some of it looks polished enough, but some of it has that weightless, rubbery quality where you stop feeling the danger. You can tell the scene is supposed to be enormous, but instead of thinking, "Wow, that was intense," you start thinking, "That looked expensive," and somehow still fake. That's a strange problem for a franchise built on spectacle. Because the bigger the set pieces get, the more they need to feel physical. If the movie wants us to believe a car is barely surviving some impossible stunt, we need to feel the impact. We need to feel metal bending, tires fighting the road, bodies being thrown around, danger pressing in. But when everything looks too digital, the action loses texture. It becomes visual noise. And F-Fast-X-X has a lot of visual noise. The movie throws so much at the screen that you sometimes stop processing individual moments. Explosions stack on top of crashes. Crashes stack on top of chase beats stack on top of more digital chaos. It is designed to overwhelm you, and sometimes it succeeds in the fun blockbuster way. Other times, it just feels like the film is using size to cover up the lack of tension. That's the downside of going bigger every time. Eventually, spectacle becomes expected. A car flying through the air is no longer shocking. A city getting wrecked is just another Tuesday. A giant explosion doesn't automatically raise the stakes because we've seen these characters walk away from everything. So the CGI has to do more than look large. It has to make the action feel alive. And not all of it does. Still, I don't want to pretend the movie looks cheap across the board. It doesn't. You can see the budget. You can see the scale. There are shots and sequences where the digital work gives the film the huge, glossy, international action feel it's aiming for. This is clearly not a small production trying to fake its size. But the problem is that money on screen does not always equal weight on screen. Fast XS is packed with spectacle, but spectacle only hits when you believe in the danger, even just for a second. And when the CGI gets too cartoonish, that belief becomes harder to hold on to, which leaves the action in a weird place. It is huge, it is busy, it is sometimes fun, but it does not always feel real enough to be thrilling. For all the criticism you can throw at F-Fast-X, the movie is not visually lazy, that's worth saying. Even when the story is cluttered, even when the logic is barely holding together, even when the CGI starts looking a little too rubbery, the film still has that polished, blockbuster surface. It looks expensive, it moves with confidence. The camera is usually chasing something, circling something, pushing into some dramatic face, or pulling back to remind you that yes, another city is about to pay the price for Dom's family problems. There is a sleekness to it. The movie clearly has resources, but it does not always use them with enough focus. A massive cast is only exciting if the characters have enough purpose. Huge action only works if it feels thrilling, not just expensive. Global locations only matter if they add flavor, not just scenery. A giant budget can buy scale, but it can't buy emotional weight by itself. And that's the difference. There are moments where the blockbuster machinery works. When Dante is on screen, when the action has a clear idea, when the movie leans into its ridiculous personality, the scale can feel fun. You can feel why this franchise became such a massive crowd pleaser. It gives audiences the kind of oversized spectacle that still feels designed for a big screen. But there are also moments where the money feels almost wasteful. So many actors, so many effects, so much destruction, so much noise. And yet the story underneath can feel thin, scattered, or unfinished. You start to wonder if the movie is trying to overwhelm you into satisfaction rather than actually earn it. That's the danger of the expensive blockbuster. It can mistake more for better, more characters, more explosions, more countries, more callbacks, more sequel setup, more everything. But after a while, more becomes heavy. It becomes clutter. It becomes a reminder that the film has enormous resources, but not always the discipline to shape them into something cleaner. Still, for fans who just want the big screen ride, A Fast X delivers that surface-level blockbuster charge. It is shiny, loud, crowded, and full of moments that are clearly designed to make the audience feel like they're watching something huge. And maybe that's enough for some viewers. But for others, the film proves that a franchise can have all the money in the world and still struggle with the one thing money can't fix, a story that actually feels complete. One thing that's honestly fascinating about S Fast XX is that the reviews almost don't matter. Not completely, of course. People still read them. People still argue about the quality. People still rank the movies, complain about the CGI, defend the action, praise Momoa, or say the franchise should have ended years ago. But on a larger level, Fast and Furious has reached that rare place where criticism is not really the main force deciding whether people show up. The brand is bigger than the conversation around the movie, and that's powerful. By the time a franchise gets to this point, it has its own built-in gravity. Audiences know the title. They know the faces, they know the tone, they know what they're buying a ticket for, even if they also know the movie might be messy. A bad review is not going to shock anyone away from CFSX, because nobody is walking in expecting delicate storytelling and perfect logic. They're expecting cars, chaos, family, impossible stunts, and maybe a few surprise returns. That's the product. And the marketing knows exactly how to sell it. The trailers don't need to explain every emotional detail. They just need to remind you that this is the next big chapter, that the family is in danger, that Jason Momoa is causing trouble, that the action is huge, and that the end of the road is supposedly beginning. That phrase alone carries weight. It turns the movie from another sequel into something you need to see if you followed the saga. That's smart marketing, because even viewers who feel tired of the franchise can get pulled back in by the promise of closure. You may not be fully excited, but you're curious. You want to know how it ends. You want to know who comes back. You want to see whether the series can actually land the plane, or the car, or the tank, or whatever impossible vehicle metaphor fits at this point. So F Fast XX benefits from momentum that has been building for years. It doesn't have to win over the audience from scratch. It already has a relationship with them. Some of that relationship is love, some of it is nostalgia, some of it is hate-watching, some of it is pure completionist duty, but all of it keeps the engine running. That's why the franchise can survive criticism that would damage a smaller film. If a new action movie had this many story problems, this much clutter, this many fake-looking effects, and this incomplete of an ending, it might struggle to get people invested. But S Fast XX comes with history. It comes with characters people recognize. It comes with the promise of a final chapter. It comes with the strange cultural confidence of a series that knows people will complain and still buy the ticket. And honestly, that's part of what makes reviewing it difficult. You can point out the flaws, and you should. The movie is messy. The writing is uneven. The pacing wobbles. The story feels incomplete. But the franchise is not only operating on traditional quality anymore, it is operating on event status. People don't just watch Fast X because they heard it's good. They watch it because it's X Fast X Prosh. That doesn't make the movie better, but it does explain why it still matters commercially and culturally. The marketing sells the scale, the nostalgia, the cast, the danger, the endgame, and the feeling that this whole ridiculous road trip is finally approaching its final miles. Whether the film itself fully earns that feeling is another question. But the machine behind it absolutely knows how to make people care enough to find out. Even though StepSX wears that PG-13 blockbuster label, the movie is still packed with violence. Not in a grim, brutal, realistic way. This is not that kind of franchise. The violence here is glossy, explosive, exaggerated, and usually wrapped inside action spectacle. Cars crash, bullets fly, bombs go off, people get thrown around, entire streets become disaster zones, and the movie mostly treats it as part of the ride. That's expected at this point. But it is still worth mentioning, because F Fast X sometimes pushes a slightly darker edge than the usual family-friendly chaos these movies try to maintain. The franchise has always had danger, obviously, but it also tends to soften the impact. Destruction happens, but the tone stays playful. People fight, but the movie quickly moves on. Cities get wrecked, but nobody really sits with the human cost for long. Here, Dante brings a different flavor to that violence. Because he doesn't just create chaos, he enjoys it. That makes his scenes feel a little more twisted than the usual action movie villain stuff. He has this dark humor to him, this playful cruelty, where the violence is not just a means to an end, it's part of his performance. He wants people uncomfortable. He wants Dom hurting. He wants the audience to see that he is not playing by the same emotional rules as everyone else. And that gives the movie a sharper edge in certain moments. There are scenes where you can feel the PG-13 line being stretched, not necessarily because the film becomes graphic, but because the attitude behind the violence feels nastier. Dante's cruelty has a theatrical quality, but there's still something rotten underneath it. He can joke, smile, and pose his way through destruction, and that contrast is part of what makes him memorable. At the same time, the movie never fully commits to being dark. It can't, really. This is still Fast and Furious. The franchise wants danger, but it also wants popcorn fun. It wants stakes, but it also wants big laughs. It wants a villain who can hurt the family, but it also wants that villain to be entertaining enough that people quote him later. So the violence exists in that strange middle space, loud enough to feel intense, polished enough to stay mainstream, and exaggerated enough that it rarely becomes truly disturbing. That balance mostly works for the kind of movie this is. But sometimes it also makes the danger feel strangely weightless. There is a lot of shooting, a lot of killing, a lot of destruction, but because the film moves so quickly and the action is so cartoonish, the consequences don't always land. The violence becomes spectacle before it becomes emotion. And maybe that's always been the franchise's way. The cars crash, the bullets fly, the family survives. The next joke arrives. Still, with Dante in the picture, Fast X Time does feel a little meaner in spots. Not enough to change the franchise completely, but enough to make his presence stand out. He adds a darker, more mischievous cruelty to a series that usually turns enemies into future dinner guests. So yes, the movie is PG-13, but it is not exactly gentle. It's loud, destructive, full of gunfire and explosions, and occasionally darker than you expect. Even if the franchise keeps polishing that darkness until it still looks like a summer blockbuster. So who is Fast X actually for? That's the question that matters more than usual here, because this is not really a movie you can drop anyone into and expect them to have the same experience. Technically, yes, the plot explains enough for a casual viewer to understand the basics. Bad guy wants revenge. Dom protects family. Cars go fast. Rome explodes. Everyone runs around looking intense. You can follow it. But understanding the plot is not the same as feeling the movie. Fast XX is built for people who already have some relationship with this franchise. Maybe they love it. Maybe they grew up with it. Maybe they think it got ridiculous years ago but still have a weird soft spot for it. Either way, the movie assumes you know the rhythm. It assumes you understand why Fast 5 matters, why certain faces returning might get a reaction, why the word family carries so much weight even when it has become a joke. For longtime fans, that history does a lot of work. A callback isn't just a callback, it's a memory. A returning character isn't just another person entering the frame, it's part of the larger soap opera. The Rio connection, Dante's revenge, the old allies, the agency material, the cliffhanger, all of it plays differently if you've been sitting in the passenger seat for years. But for someone coming in fresh, Fast XX could feel completely insane. Not fun insane necessarily, maybe just crowded insane. There are too many characters, too many past connections, too many assumed emotional stakes, too many old storylines being dragged back into the present. A newcomer might spend half the movie wondering why everyone is so serious about people they barely know, or why villains keep becoming friends, or why cars seem to operate on spiritual belief instead of engineering. And honestly, that's fair. This is not the best entry point. If anything, Fast XX feels like homework disguised as a blockbuster. It wants to be loud and accessible, but it is also deeply tangled in franchise history. You can enjoy the action without knowing every detail, sure, but the emotional material depends heavily on recognition. The movie is constantly pointing backward while pretending to race forward, so the ideal audience is pretty clear. If you're already a fan, if you've accepted the broken physics, the melodrama, the fake deaths, the endless family speeches, the way every villain is one barbecue away from redemption, then Fast X probably gives you enough to enjoy. It has spectacle, it has Dante, it has big moments. It has that ridiculous franchise confidence that fans either love or tolerate with a smile. But if you're tired of the formula, this movie will not convert you. And if you never liked these films, Fast X-Men is absolutely not the one that will suddenly make everything click. In fact, it might confirm every criticism you already had. Too loud, too long, too crowded, too silly, too dependent on nostalgia, too comfortable with nonsense. That's the honest answer. Fast XX is mainly for the already initiated, for the people who know what this franchise is and still want to see where the road ends. For viewers who can laugh at the absurdity without completely disconnecting from the emotion. For fans who understand that this series stopped being realistic a long time ago and has now become something closer to a family-themed action circus with cars. And if that sounds exhausting, it probably will be. But if that sounds like exactly what you came for, then S-Fast X still has enough fuel in the tank to keep you watching. And this is where S-Fast X becomes hard to judge in a simple way, because depending on what you want from it, this movie can look very different. If you judge it as a clean action film with strong writing, focused storytelling, meaningful stakes, balanced characters, and a satisfying ending, then yeah, it has a lot of problems. A lot. The plot is messy, the structure is crowded, the logic is almost decorative, and the movie spends so much time setting up the next chapter that it sometimes forgets to fully become its own. From that angle, F-Fast XX is weak, maybe even one of the weaker entries, depending on how tired you are of the formula. But if you judge it as a late-stage Fast and Furious movie, a loud, ridiculous, overstuffed, self-aware piece of franchise chaos, then it becomes a little easier to enjoy. Not because the flaws disappear. They don't, but because the movie has enough personality in certain places to keep it from being completely lifeless. Most of that personality comes from Jason Momoa. Dante gives the film a spark it badly needs. He's weird, theatrical, annoying in the right way for some viewers and the wrong way for others, but he is never forgettable. In a movie where so much of the formula feels recycled, he brings something unpredictable. Every time he shows up, the film feels less like it's just running through franchise obligations and more like someone is actually having fun. And that matters, because a lot of Fast XX is franchise obligation, the returning characters, the family speeches, the callbacks, the setup, the global scale, the cliffhanger, the constant reminder that this is the road to the end. You can feel the machinery working. Sometimes it's exciting, sometimes it's exhausting. That's why reactions to this movie are so split. Some viewers will look at the same absurd action scene and say, that was amazing. Others will say, that was embarrassing. Some will find the family theme sincere. Others will find it unbearable. Some will love Dante's flamboyant madness. Others will think he turns the movie into a cartoon. Some will leave excited for the finale. Others will leave annoyed that the story didn't properly end. And honestly, all of those reactions make sense. This franchise has become so specific, so exaggerated, and so deep into its own mythology that it almost resists normal criticism. You either accept the ride on its own terms, or the whole thing falls apart. There is not much middle ground left. For me, F-Fast X lands somewhere between entertaining nonsense and frustrating sequel setup. It has moments that work. It has energy. It has a standout villain. It has a few fun action beats. It has that strange blockbuster confidence where even the dumbest decisions are made with full commitment. But it also feels bloated, incomplete, and stretched thin by its own franchise weight. So, is it a bad movie? In plenty of ways, yes. Is it completely unenjoyable? No, not really. It's too strange, too loud, and too committed to its own madness to be boring all the way through. But it's also too messy and unfinished to feel truly satisfying. That's the split. SFTCS is not strong enough to silence the critics, but it is not empty enough to dismiss completely. It is a broken engine still making a lot of noise, and somehow, every now and then, that noise still sounds like fun. So where does that leave SXX? Honestly, in a very familiar place for this franchise. It is messy, it is loud, it is overstuffed. It makes very little sense if you stop and think about it for more than a few seconds. The writing is shaky, the pacing is uneven, the cast is too crowded, and the ending feels less like a conclusion and more like the movie slamming the brakes right before the actual finish line. And yet, I can't pretend there's nothing here, because F-Fast X still has pieces that work. Jason Momoa gives the movie exactly the kind of chaotic villain energy it needed. Dante is ridiculous, but he is also the one part of the film that feels genuinely alive most of the time. The connection back to Fast Five gives the story a better hook than a random new villain would have had. Some of the action is fun in that completely absurd, don't question it kind of way. And for fans who have been with this franchise for years, there is still some pleasure in watching the family come back together, even when the movie keeps splitting them apart. But the problems are hard to ignore. To Pars's EPS, WEV Enfastix wants to feel like the beginning of a grand finale, but it often feels more like a setup chapter that forgot to fully satisfy on its own. It keeps adding characters, locations, callbacks, cameos, and future teases, but not all of them add weight. Some add clutter. The film is constantly moving, but movement is not the same as momentum. It is constantly loud, but loud is not the same as exciting. That's the biggest issue. The movie has scale, but not always impact. It has emotion, but not always heart. It has history, but not always meaning. And it has a cliffhanger, but not a real ending. Still, if you already enjoy what this franchise has become, you'll probably find enough here to keep you entertained. You know the deal by now. Cars break physics. Dom protects family. Villains become personal. Dead characters may or may not stay dead. Cities get destroyed. Someone says something emotional like the fate of the universe depends on loyalty and barbecue. That is the package. If that package still works for you, Fast X gives you another ride with a strong villain and a lot of ridiculous spectacle. If you're tired of the formula, this movie will not change your mind. In fact, it might make the fatigue even worse. For me, Fast XX is not the triumphant beginning of the end it wants to be. It is too scattered, too incomplete, and too dependent on the next movie to stand as one of the better entries. But it is not completely dead on arrival either. It has enough energy to survive. It has enough stupidity to entertain. And it has Jason Momoa doing so much weird villain business that, even when the movie around him is falling apart, you at least have something worth watching. So, the final verdict is pretty simple. As Fast X Express is a flawed, crowded, half-finished blockbuster that runs mostly on franchise loyalty, oversized action, and one scene-stealing villain. It is not great, it is not clean, it is definitely not logical, but for the right audience, it is still watchable nonsense. And at this point, maybe that is exactly what the Fast and Furious franchise has trained us to expect.